Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Prélade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre. Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tallier. Monsieur le député Luce. Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Lehigara. Monsieur le député Ayer. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves. Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Mezek. Monsieur le député Balash. Monsieur le député Coles. Madame le député Poré.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf. Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune. Madame le député Miller. Madame le député Howe. Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il t'a plu de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne. Ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien. Et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre. Vous jurez que Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Sir, the Constable of St. John is attending a medical appointment and will be in as soon as he can. Thank you.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
C'est fait?
Monsieur le député Tallier.
Oui.
Présente.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce. Madame le député Dublé.
So, Deputy Dubley would like to be excused on parental responsibility. Her child is unwell and she might be able to join later on online.
Members content to mark Deputy Dublé excusé? Excusé.
Madame la Deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame la Deputy Moore.
Sir, Deputy Moore is malade.
Vous jurez que Madame la Deputy Moore est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Madame la Deputy Miller.
So Deputy Miller is out of the island on state's business. Thank you.
State's business.
Assemblée tout le monde, Monsieur le Président.
Les États sont constitués.
Sir, before we start, could I just take a moment to inform the Assembly that I have to attend a funeral of a colleague from my department today at 1:30, so therefore I won't be at the States when we convene again after lunch recess. I will attend as soon as possible after.
Thank you, Deputy Counsel.
So, and the same for me for the same reason.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Very well then, so we resume the debate on P48, the use of cash in Jersey, lodged by Deputy Tadier. I had the following speakers marked to speak. So first Deputy Ferry, then Deputy Kovac, the Constable of St Brelard, next Deputy Wilson, and Deputy Renouf, and then Deputy Scott. So starting with Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And when I read through this proposition, I couldn't help but draw on my past when I was Chief Executive of Citizens Advice. And one of the roles that I used to undertake doing that work was to visit the prison. And there was two things that every inmate was keen to tell us. And obviously the purpose of our visit was to establish relationships so that when people are released from prison, they knew where to seek help with different issues. And of the two things that the inmates were always keen to tell us, one was their earliest release date, which for understandable reasons was imprinted on their minds. And the other item they were always keen to tell us about was why they were in there in the first place. And of course, that wasn't why we were there. We weren't there to judge. We were there to offer support and help. But one of the offences that concerned me the most was when people had been convicted of crimes of fraud. Because what would invariably happen is upon their release, they would try to integrate back into society to discover that their bank account had been closed. They would then endeavour to seek employment, and there are very few employers that would want to pay them in cash, because that's not what good employers do, is the way that it's viewed. So those people would quickly come to us, and we would work with them to try and find a way that they could get into the banking system, or back into the banking system. And without giving, obviously, anyone's details away, there was a particular case that concerned me where a client of ours presented with a cheque for a handsome sum of money and had no way of spending it and no way of cashing it because no bank would accept his business. And we did work with that person and were able to re-establish an account for them, but it took a lot of work and it took a lot of coaxing. So the other group of people who we would regularly assist with access to banking was people whose finances had collapsed, and perhaps they were going through a system of en désastre or remède bien meuble, and likewise, very often those people were excluded from the banking system. And so when we brought in debt remission orders, it could help in limited circumstances and hopefully preserve access to banking. But we were left with offering people the services of Community Savings Limited. And I've heard it described as Community Savings Bank. It's not a bank. It's an organisation that offers banking-type facilities, and that has improved vastly over the recent years from when it first started up. but it still isn't a bank. It does great work for its clients, and it has ancillary services that it can refer people to. But another piece of work that we were looking at, and I'm looking here particularly on Part B of the proposition, is the cost of doing banking, the cost of banking itself. Now, we know that some banks are reluctant to take cash over the sum of £20,000 for individual businesses. If you go over that limit, they reserve the right to not accept any more cash. So that is a concern for people who do want to continue to deal in cash. The other group of people who we regularly used to have contact with, and if we group that people, we call them the unbanked, people who don't have access to the banking system, was people that had gambling addiction, or people whose finances had collapsed, and the only way they could get out of where they were was to cut up their credit cards. Because, an addiction is an addiction. And if people are online gambling, for some people, the only way to stop that is to sever the method that they're actually spending that money. And part of the advice that we would give people who were in that situation was when they've got cash in front of them, it's very often easier for people to budget. They can put pots of money for different items, and they know when that money is gone that there is no more, and that there is no credit facility to be had. I think finally, another piece of work that we were involved in was access to basic bank accounts. Now, in the UK, banks are required to offer bank accounts even to people that don't have a fixed abode. That same requirement does not apply in Jersey. So, this is a bigger piece of work than just cash. I think it's a really useful conversation that we're having here, but it's so much bigger than just the use of cash. I think it also links to access to the banking system, the types of basic bank accounts that are offered in Jersey, and how to get people back into the banking system when they have been excluded. Because going back to those prisoners who had been released, it always felt to me that they were serving their sentence twice. Firstly, when they were incarcerated, and secondly, when they were back in society in a prison without bars, because they still couldn't do anything. And they had to rely on friends or family or partners, and that itself was fraught with danger. So I will be supporting certainly Part B of this proposition, because I think there's a whole piece of work here that needs to be done and examined. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Ferry. Deputy Kovach.
Thank you, sir. I rise in support of this proposal as a whole, and not because I resist progress, but because I believe progress must include and consider everyone. And this is not about stopping digital payments. It's about protecting choice, like real choice. We are told this will burden businesses. I say this, as someone who owns a family business in hospitality, we proudly accept cash. Not reluctantly, proudly. Because every customer matters. And yes, sometimes that customers only has cash. Should we turn them away? In a cost of living crisis, really? We hear about efficiency, about speed, about cost, which we've seen occurs on both sides, cash or card usage, sometimes even more on card transactions. So don't scare people unnecessarily about costs, and even those charges can also be regulated if found unfair, so there are ways. We hear about convenience. Convenient for whom? Certainly not for the elderly person who cannot use a smartphone or can't see the buttons of a POS. Not for someone with a disability, not for a victim of domestic and financial abuse, not for the child learning the value of money for the first time. Cash is not just payment. It is inclusion, it is independence, it is dignity. Ministers say access to cash is fine, don't worry. But access means nothing if you cannot use it. A note in your pocket, it's useless if the shop refuses it. Look at where Sweden got on this. Not knowing now how to reverse, as many vulnerable residents can't pay with cash for essential products or services. Is that where we want to get? To act only when it's too late? or instead to look at the solutions highlighted by Deputy Tadier in his report that France and the European Central Bank are putting in place, making cash generally legal tender and not allowing it to be rejected. They say costs will rise, but are we seriously saying that the solution to rising costs it is to refuse customers? That we will solve economic pressure by turning away trade? And let's talk about tourism. Visitors still come here with cash. They expect to use it. Are we really going to tell them, sorry, not welcome unless you have the right app or the right card, as even some cards are refused? We're very proud of our unique Jersey cow. It's part of our heritage, and no other currency in the world has our Jersey cow on it, which, if nothing else, is a great conversation starter. It might even help sell a bit more Jersey butter or Jersey ice cream. And that must count for something as well, right? Wherever I travel, if I have any Jersey pound notes on me, everyone wants it as a souvenir for being so unique. So let's be proud to use our Jersey pounds here in Jersey, not quietly let them disappear. We are also told banks charge more for handling cash. Of course they do, because the system is being pushed in that direction. But that is precisely why we must act. We cannot allow commercial incentives to quietly remove a basic freedom. And let's not forget resilience. Systems fail, whether due to wars, hackers, or many other reasons. Cards stop working, accounts get frozen, networks go down. It happens, and we've seen it happen. When it does, cash is not old-fashioned, it is essential. Ask yourself honestly, on that day, would you want to have cash on you and for cash to be accepted? This proposition is balanced. It recognizes reality. It allows exemptions where there are very valid reasons for just accepting cards, but that should be the exemption, not the other way around. Therefore, let's not overcomplicate this. If a business can take your money, it should definitely take your money, however you choose to pay it. Simple, fair, inclusive. Sir, I believe this is about the kind of society we want to be. One that is efficient not just for some, but one that works for everyone. I ask you all to please support the proposition, protect choice, protect inclusion, protect cash, and let's keep Jersey open for business, open for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Kovac. The Constable of St. Brelard.
So before the constable starts, sorry, could I raise the defo on Conatob Troy, please? He is online.
Members content to raise the defo? The defo is raised.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I've run a business which for over 50 years, has taken payment in most forms over that period. I've seen the rapid evolution from cheque payments to card and bank transfer payments. We rarely see a cheque these days, and that's been a rapid change in the past few years. The business has always been happy to receive cash if proffered, provided the sums involved don't exceed money laundering controls, which are in place and put in place by the Financial Services Commission, quite rightly so too. Card providers, sir, insist that you can't put a de minimis figure on a card payment, but I can assure members that payment by card with its associated costs for an 82p local stamp does great. I've also had the experience, sir, of dealing with the changed bank landscape, and like all businesses have had to adapt to different routines. The bookkeeping and routine behind taking cash is more onerous and depends a lot on point of sale software used in the business. The additional need to bank the cash and charges made is an additional business cost. There is always the issue of risk from casual theft and the security surrounding it. It's probably easier to make errors with cash than cards in terms of bookkeeping, but it does sharpen the mental arithmetic capabilities of staff having to deal with it. There is a perception by some that it's advantageous to pay cash, as it was perceived to be a quick form of sure payment. How many times have I heard the term, how much for cash? This has become less attractive to business with the advent of card systems. There's no recourse to insurance with a cash payment, as is the case with most card providers who will charge back the business if disputes arise. I've never been in what I might call over-the-counter hospitality types of business, and I defer to Deputy Ward and Deputy Kovacs in that, but it seems to me that there are hygiene issues to consider when simultaneously handling cash and food. There is also, sir, as has been mentioned by others, the visitor economy, where visitors come to the island armed with sterling in cash as they're spending money. The converse being that when we travel, we like a bit of cash in our pockets to cover incidental expenses and tips. My business, sir, operates a foreign exchange facility, and that is certainly the case, and I witness that regularly. In terms of other countries, sir, I've noted that in Brussels recently, businesses no longer take copper coins. This is not the case in France, but it is an area that I think we need to keep an eye on to prevent unnecessary inflation. Card payments also have the risks for the trader in the guise of power or machinery failure. And sir, I can say there was a power cut on Sunday morning for about 20 minutes in St. Bernard's as a result of a high voltage cable failure. I'm grateful for the JEC teams for reinstating that supply so quickly, but it did affect several businesses. Fortunately, on a Sunday, not so many were open as might have been the case in the week. So these disruptions do happen, and businesses need to be able to take cash or simply close. End-of-day card reconciliations are quicker with the cards than with cash, as there's no counting involved. And I would say, sir, that the bookkeeping is probably easier. Cards do permit their holders to overspend, sir, with the risk of attracting excessive interest rates if balances aren't paid by a certain time. Those that have difficulty in managing their affairs are better advised to stick to cash. And I think this is a really important point, certainly for younger people who perhaps haven't got the experience of life and having to, it's best to avoid getting into debt at an early stage. I think interest rates of sometimes 30% can be considered onerous. A decision not to take cash by any business will be informed by their business model, and if they choose not to take cash, there will be competitors who will. I suggest, sir, that any charity that doesn't arm itself with a sum-up machine these days is missing a trick. I've even succumbed to paying my weekly contribution in church online. There's a QR code to enable this behind every pew. Previous speaker, sir, mentioned utility payments, and I can say that as a business with a post office within, that Jersey Post, through its main and sub-post offices, will take bill payments by cash, cheque or card as part of their agency arrangements. Retailing today, sir, faces enormous competition from online providers, and I really do believe that government interference into the methods of payments may be ideological, but impractical and unpoliceable. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatar. Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the Conatar. Many of us will have heard the phrase cash is king. More than a phrase, it's a principle that reflects the power, the flexibility and security that physical money gives people in their everyday lives. In Jersey, this principle is not just about economics. As we've heard, it's about choice, it's about independence and social cohesion. And as we've heard from other speakers, cash gives people control. It allows them to budget, pay for essentials and make decisions without reliance on technology or third parties. To take away cash is to take away freedom, the ability for people to decide how they live their lives. When cash diminishes, the result is social isolation, exclusion, and a weakening of community life. In a small island like ours, these effects are felt quickly and deeply. So I was a member of the panel conducting the cash review, and I have to admit it was a moving experience being in the company of islanders when we were talking to them about this. And Deputy Ferry is right to recognise that there is a wider sociological issue here. We met people during the review literally holding on to their cash. And I remember one gentleman coming out from counting out his purse in front of us, how much he had to pay his bills and the amount of money he was going to spend on his daily trip to the shop. He held it so tightly, he almost had a grip on the money, so to speak, as though it could have been taken away from him at any moment. And that might sound, nothing here in this assembly, but I can assure you it was quite a moment. He told me that apart from the lunch that he had at the Good Companions Club, his only outing each week was to the supermarket near where he lived. He liked going there, he said, because he said you can have a chat to someone, and I like to see what I'm buying and pay good money for it. He also went on to tell me how he has pots of money at home for the grandchildren that he fills with spare change, and talked about the lovely interaction he had had with his grandson about why the pot needed to be full before he could have access to it. The reason I'm recounting the story is because cash for many is not just a financial currency. It's a currency that builds social interaction and exchange for human connection. It carries more than monetary value for some people. It carries a deeper worth. A feeling of doing good when coin or notes are dropped into a charitable basket or handed over on a one-to-one basis to a person in need. It becomes a symbol of rescue as much as a symbol of wealth. Deputy Tadia's proposition recognises that protecting cash is more than banking. It's about people, it's about fairness, and it's about community well-being. It ensures that as we move toward a more digital economy, no one in Jersey, no resident, no family, no vulnerable group is left behind. Cash remains king because it generates and guarantees choice, resilience, and inclusion. The problem that we've got at the moment is that denying access to cash is happening by chance, and I think we need to take seriously the removal of choice if islanders are being denied access. We believe this is being denied by stealth. Banks are closing, there are places where you can only use a card, and gradually people are having those choices restricted. If I recall, one of the issues raised during the review was the actual cost of banking, and I know the Conotab has just made reference to it. But if there is any policy work that needs to be done to support and protect consumers and businesses, then banks need to be considering what costs they are putting on businesses to handle cash in the island. The Minister for Economic Development talked about being dictatorial, but in my view, banks are dictating to people how and in what way to use their money. You've heard from Deputy Ferry examples of where people have had banking facilities, no banking facilities are available to them, and the hardship that follows. We shouldn't be placing people in that sort of a situation. There's a lot of research out there on cash use, and this is conducted by reputable institutions around the world. Recent policy research from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, makes a clear point. While digital payments have expanded rapidly, this trend also presents risks for consumers who cannot or prefer not to transact digitally. The OECD highlights that safeguarding consumers' access to cash is a necessary policy consideration in the digital economy. The European Central Bank has also analysed payment behaviour across Europe and found that cash continues to play a significant role in people's financial lives, even as digitalisation increases. The ECB's data shows that many individuals across age group still use cash regularly, including younger adults, holding cash for precautionary reasons, and older adults who use cash more frequently in everyday transactions. And this research directly challenges assumptions that cash will disappear simply because digital options are available. In the UK, regulators have collected data showing how access to cash infrastructure has changed in recent years. The Financial Conduct Authority monitors the physical network of cash access points, ATMs, bank branches, post office services, and provides baseline coverage data to track how networks support consumer access. These measures are important because they highlight how quickly infrastructure can shrink if left unprotected, with implications for those who rely on cash for everyday spending. Independent research, including the Access to Cash review that was taking place in the UK, has repeatedly warned that a significant number of people, millions in fact, across the UK, would struggle in a cashless society. Though the UK context differs from Jersey's, the lesson is clear: digital payments alone do not yet work for everyone, and many rely on cash as a practical necessity. Beyond access and usage, research literature on cash and digital payments makes several broader socio-economic points that are directly relevant to our debate. Cash continues to be used not just as a payment, but as a precautionary store of value and a buffer in times of uncertainty. A shift away from cash has the potential to create a digital divide in payments, where people with limited access to digital tools or skills are excluded from full participation in the economy. Conatab Lewis referenced the reduction in banks in his parish yesterday and talked about the impact on loneliness and social inclusion for his parishioners, but he's not unique or alone in that. This is something that we heard right the way across the review, and it does ask us whether or not we are joining up the dots on the policy framework that we're advocating at the moment. The elephant in the room is whether or not we're going to have legislation. It remains a relevant and persistent payment method across demographics, not just amongst the most vulnerable, as I've said. Deputy Tadia's proposition aligns with the body of evidence. It recognises that cash is not merely a payment preference, but a socio-economic reality that affects inclusion, choice and equality. Preserving cash is a public policy commitment to ensuring that no one is left behind as Jersey evolves its financial ecosystem. Yes, and I agree with the Conatab of St Brelod. Cash handling does have operational issues associated, but I would ask him to consider this: at what price do we put? What price do we put on inclusion, in autonomy and access to essential goods? The small expense of accepting cash is outweighed by the benefits, serving all customers, maintaining community trust, and ensuring no resident is left behind. I believe, sir, that with smart, supportive measures, businesses can continue to accept cash without undue burden, while Jersey can safeguard fairness and choice for islanders. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Wilson. Deputy Ronoff.
Thank you, sir. No one seems to have a problem here with Part B, so I'm going to concentrate on Part A in my comments and see if I can persuade members who may be wavering to take the leap and support the whole proposition. I must say I'm disappointed in the Council of Ministers' comments, particularly the first comments paper, which I think is more than a little tone deaf. I say the first comments paper because there is something a bit strange going on. There are two different government comments papers. One which reads a bit hardline, the other more, I would say, even-handed. Maybe it's because the government is split on this issue and the two papers were written by two different ministers or ministerial teams. I guess that's agree to differ in action. The government's position in the first comments paper is that cash is still widely used, so there is no evidence of a need to take action. And it argues that mandating cash will impose unnecessary costs on business to no clear benefit. And those are all valid debating points, certainly important to be considered. But it would have been good if they had at least acknowledged the very widespread public concern about the decline of cash and the potential for social and economic exclusion for those who rely on cash. In other words, the issues that motivated this proposition. Perhaps ministers need to get out more. Deputy Tadia's work on this has touched a nerve. I would note that some ministers have actually been more conciliatory in their speeches, but the first comments paper is stark. Its remarks are framed almost entirely in terms of the impact on business. But Deputy Tadia brought this proposition because it is a matter of considerable public concern. I noted just one reference in that paper to the potential inflationary impact which the proposition might bring, which qualifies as an impact on the public. Otherwise, the notion that there might be legitimate public concern is not even mentioned. None of the potential risks that Deputy Tadyer discusses are addressed in that first comments paper. Not one. So this proposition engages a big question. Is there a point at which government will need to step in and challenge the direction of travel that is being driven by big tech, or intervene to protect against negative outcomes? The issues, I think, are similar to the issues we face around social media. They are to do with the protections that we might choose to put in place, given that very large corporations are driving society in a certain direction based on the inevitability of a certain vision of technological progress. So I am exceptionally pro-technology. I'm a techno-optimist, and I want Jersey to be a highly digital island. But I am also exceptionally mindful of the dangers of social exclusion. A little digression perhaps, but I think it is relevant. It's worth a little look at history to see the weight of the forces that are at work here. One of the most consequential decisions of any president of the United States was in 1996, when President Clinton responded to lobbying by digital companies to sign a law known as Section 230. It addressed an issue that had arisen as the internet began to grow. Were digital platforms publishers in the same way as newspapers were publishers, which meant that they were responsible for the content they contained, or were they more like digital notice boards where people could post what they wanted and therefore the company had no responsibility for the content? Section 230 freed the digital companies, removed legal liability for what was published on their platforms. They were notice boards, not publishers. And that was the basis of the unequal battle between traditional media, particularly newspapers, for example, and those digital platforms. One had legal responsibilities, the other didn't. Now, of course, the situation is different. Digital platforms cannot argue anymore that they are passive notice boards. Social media companies use algorithms to actively promote and recommend content, which is a form of editorial content judgment. And so we have come back full circle. Only a few days ago came the most significant rowback on the freedom that was established by Section 230 so far. Social media companies have been held responsible for the death of a young woman who committed suicide. They were ruled to be negligent in the design and operation of their platforms. So society, through the courts, is now pushing back against the idea that big tech is absolved of legal responsibility for what happens on their platforms. And we are in the midst of that debate in Jersey to work out how much freedom we give tech companies and the dangers of social media algorithms. I hope members can see the relationship to the question of cash. This too is driven by big tech. Cashless payments are delivering huge benefits to society in terms of convenience and efficiency. But there are also wider social issues that come with the adoption of digital payments, which are being driven very hard. It's not a passive process. It's being driven very hard by the digital payment companies. But of course, there are many people who depend heavily on cash, and they are usually less well off or otherwise vulnerable. And I'm grateful to Deputy Miles and Deputy Ferry for highlighting those issues with great eloquence. And even those who are comfortable with digital payments may see the need for maintaining cash as a strong, relevant system. Privacy, resilience, personal freedom, over-reliance on a small number of remote companies, all these are relevant considerations. But I want to briefly touch on one particular way in which the reduction in cash might be magnified as a problem in the near future. Members may have heard about one of the new frontiers in digital payments, which is called agentic commerce. This is where an AI agent does your shopping for you. Instead of you searching for the cheapest price, for example, for an item on the internet, you tell the AI agent what you want, you set some parameters, size, let's say, of clothing or whatever it is, and ask it to find the cheapest price, let's say. But of course, agentic commerce is predicated on stored payment credentials, established financial identities. It relies on algorithms. but marginalised individuals may not be able to gain access to these services. Without credit histories of online payments, they may be unable to take advantage of agentic commerce, widening social exclusion. They may then turn to less secure online alternatives, exposing them to predatory lenders or scams. And in this situation, I think retaining a strong cash economy is incredibly vital. I think the key point here is that at some point, just as with social media, we will approach the need to do the hard thing and stand in the way of what big tech wants to do and say, we have a view about this on the basis of what society needs to do. And one of the things we might do is to do with cash. So the question we have to answer is, first, does this proposition mark the moment to start swinging into action? And second, is this the right action? Take the second part first. I do not support compelling all businesses to accept cash, but neither does Deputy Tadyer. His chosen method is by a list of exemptions. It sounds a little bureaucratic and resource heavy, but there is a lot of discretion here. A light touch could be deployed. It would be trivially easy for a future Council of Ministers to say that the bus service was exempt, for example, or to say everything was exempt except groceries and pharmacies, as in the example that was given yesterday from Sweden, I think. Any half-decent civil servant tasked with the brief of making this a light-touch implementation would be able to do so. Which brings me to Deputy Morell's argument. Deputy Morell said Part B should come before Part A. Policy first, then the action. That's an argument, but it's not the only way of looking at things. You could equally argue that Part A is an important holding measure whilst you sort out your long-term policy. A precautionary move. Then once you've completed Part B, Part A could fall away or be changed or adapted or whatever. And I think we should be clear here that in the international context, Deputy Tadyer's proposition is exceedingly moderate. He is not suggesting that all businesses be mandated to accept cash, because he's accepting there should be exemptions, and he's giving the government wide discretion over that. Perhaps members think we're going out on a bit of a limb, but no, we wouldn't at all. Let's take France. All traders are obliged to accept cash with fines for refusal. Spain mandates that businesses must accept cash for transactions up to €1,000. Norway prohibits companies from refusing cash payments for amounts up to, equivalently in pounds, about £1,500. So Jersey would not be swimming against the tide if we accept Part A of this proposition. We'd be travelling with the current. In fact, we'd be taking a very Jersey approach, not going the whole European hog of total bans, but a general presumption in favour of cash with sensible exemptions. Which leaves, I guess, the question of timing. Is this the moment to put that hand up and say this is something we have to deal with? Is this the moment for government action? Is this when we say we've seen the direction of travel, we know where this could go, we know there are powerful forces at work, but you know what? You're not sure this really puts people first. I think it's a pretty reasonable case to say the time is now. In effect, Part A says, put down a marker. It can be interpreted fairly loosely. It's not really the detail that is important in this proposition. That'll be decided by the next government. It can be implemented in many different ways. It's the decision to act, to show that we care, we understand the issues, we understand what the public are talking about, and we want to take our stand. Let's act now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Renouf. The next speaker is Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. And my apologies, I'm not in the States Assembly because I have a cough. I did not find the previous speaker's speech regarding Part A of the proposition persuasive enough to support that part of the proposition. But I do believe we should all accept the fears in our older community that they no longer are regarded as relevant in today's society. This proposition plays on the fears of the older members. The deputy in his speech suggested there are businesses saying, Deputy Tadier, the proposer in his speech, suggested there are businesses saying, we don't want your sort here. I hope this speech will explain why those fears are unfounded. Not only are those members of this community relevant, the way in which they wish to do business will mean there always will be businesses who accept their cash. On the other hand, a rule that requires all businesses to accept cash is a route that can deprive the community of valuable services. And it also could assist illicit businesses more than the elderly and the sight impaired that it aims to assist. Part A of the proposition promotes a presumption that all businesses should accept cash subject to reasonable exemptions. How can this be workable and fair? So businesses don't survive without customers. Businesses are customer-based services. Businesses have different types of service and different types of business model. Some are internet businesses. The cost of handling money does not fit their business model. Deputy Renouf has mentioned the competitive edge provided by big tech companies in some retail markets. We can't change that through this proposition. Many islanders here use global internet businesses. Their scale and focus on card-based transactions support their operations and often cheaper prices. Why do islanders use them? Because they want those cheaper prices. They can manage their budgets better that way. It can be more convenient for them. Do we want to deprive them of that option? Because if we want to help islanders to manage the cost of living, Part A of this proposition isn't going to help them. It's suggesting that we force companies like Amazon to accept cash from us unless we accept them. So that is absurd. How would we even police the global internet? How can we consult with them as stakeholders? In the meantime, the help of friends and family remains a way for those who cannot or do not wish to use cards to order online. Or are we going to say those operations outside the island can run in the way they do, but no business can do so here, sir? This proposition could deter anyone in the island from setting up an internet business. If we had a company like Amazon operating here, the whole island would be richer. We could provide more in the way of pensions and community support in the form of taxes. And it often is discussed how young people leave this island because of the cost of living and perhaps the cost of setting up a business and operating it too. This proposition could encourage younger people who are tech savvy and entrepreneurial, who could offer a valuable contribution to this island's future economy, to leave the island. Let's look to the businesses who serve our local community more directly, sir. Those who do accept cash from their customers. We should not take these businesses for granted. The business owners do not have to establish businesses. Many do it out of love of service of others. Businesses rely on custom, and that includes the senior citizen who comes into their shop and uses cash. It may be an additional cost to that business, but they factor that into their own type of service. Recently, in my own constituency, one parishioner, an elderly one, who does use the internet, praised the owner of a local farm shop for offering to drive him somewhere when he had missed his bus. Why should we be forcing shopkeepers who depend on customers' goodwill to exercise such goodwill? Because goodwill is a valuable asset to a business. When they are bought and sold, a price is assigned to it. Businesses are nothing without their customer base. And it varies. So do our choice of businesses. I have to buy produce from farm stores with cash. I use cards in a local sandwich shop whose cards payment system does not allow me to tip the serving staff. So I sometimes pay in cash just to provide me with the change to pay them tips. That is a different business model. When it comes to local businesses, why did Deputy Tadyer not bring a proposition telling local businesses to be kind to older and blind customers? Because this is what this is telling them to do. Do local businesses need to be told that? As other members have mentioned, there is a cost to accepting cash. I would prefer businesses to use discretion in serving their customers rather than to be forced into accepting cash from people who may be less inconvenienced by it, who even could be petty money laundering. Often for businesses, the problem is not having to deposit cash, but having to find change when they are short of it. There are ways around this when services work together. For example, I have a relative who owns a coin-operated laundrette in a small shopping centre who frequently supplies change to other shops. It reduces her need to take change to the banks and more often than not charge to exchange notes for change. So the Deputy has built a case based on fear and the concern caused by a sports centre, which is a government facility rather than a business, not accepting cash. That situation was resolved by the Minister for Infrastructure almost immediately. Part A would be workable if it looked to formulate a specific list of businesses who we wish to force to accept cash, perhaps, but that's not what Part A says. The problem is that this states, perhaps, this problem is that the States Assembly and the political party of which the Deputy is a member, or even the Deputy, has been accused of not doing enough for old people. We could always do more. However, Part A could be regarded as an ill-judged electioneering measure. Many older people are wise people too. If you want to help the older generation, don't take measures that are anti-business and which could harm economic growth. Support the businesses that support them instead. This proposition, accordingly, at least Part A of it, is not supported by the Council of Ministers. Paragraph A presents difficulties in both drafting and application because it requires all businesses first to be required to accept cash and then to work out categories to exclude them. With respect to Part B, there could be a need to see how businesses might be supported in accepting cash and providing change if needed. I will therefore just be supporting Part B of the proposition if the Deputy is willing to take the proposition in parts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Scott. So, Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And before my speech, can I ask your views or some clarifications? And this two questions based on Deputy Raneff's speech, which was very helpful. So, my first question. Does it mean that Part A, even if it's saying must, that the policy development can bring any exemption when it will be brought back?
Yes, as I read Part A, the unless part of it, so the unless they are exempt qualifies the first part. So the exemptions will apply across the board, so yes.
Okay, thank you. And second question, does this proposition require to the policy when it will be developed, including exemption, to come back to the Assembly, or it will be signed by the Minister in charge?
As I read it, there's no requirement for it to be brought back. It's to be developed by the Council, and I've ruled that's the Council of Ministers, not the States Assembly.
Thank you. I will speak as I go, and I apologize in advance if it's not fully organized speech, because I've changed my mind, I'm not sure how many times during this debate. From yesterday, when I heard Deputy Miles, and I felt we must adopt two parts. When I've heard Deputy Morel, I felt no, only Part B. When I've heard Deputy Stevenson, I changed my mind again. And I'm still not entirely sure how I'm going to vote on Part A. And I will share my my way of thinking. Because I completely support the principle. As Deputy Wilson said this morning, it's the freedom. People, it's not the preference, it's necessity. I completely, 200% agree with it. We talk about older residents who are not comfortable with digital payments. We talk about people with disabilities that require. We talk about children that know how to manage money, and victim of domestic abuse or financial abuse, and for people who cash is a lifeline, the people who can handle cash. So my principles, my values are completely with this now. And I'm not worried about the businesses, by the way, paying more or less. As people know, when I elected, I had two businesses, one retail business, and I still have a travel business that I'm running. And both businesses could accept cash. And to be honest, to charge 50p on card costs probably more than to accept 50p. So I think that the whole balance about businesses paying more and it's more difficult to handle, it is complex, and sometimes we didn't have a change, but it's something that businesses need to manage. Now, where I'm finding myself now, it's does we debate necessity of cash? If this proposition about necessity of cash in our life, I'm not sure. But this proposition clearly saying that businesses must accept cash. And exemptions will be defined later. I think that I always have a problem with word must, generally, because must is the blunt for me. And it's right, the Deputy Tadia rightly put exemptions, but we don't have examples of exemptions. And kind of I completely can see that all food outlets, so where is the limit? Where are the threshold? And when I'm asking about the threshold, as a business, if somebody comes to you with £200, is it reasonable? £500, is it reasonable? Or £1,000 or £2,000? And this is where I started to struggle when the businesses start to ask clients where the money coming from. I can see us as a PEP bringing this cash to the bank, the business accepted this cash, would start to be asked questions. It's practicalities that can be sorted, but this practical question remain unanswered. So I will finish in my speech in literally a minute, and I will listen to further speakers and also Deputy Tadia, because from one side, I completely agree, we must protect access to cash, we must protect people who rely on it, no resident should be left behind, and buses, I believe we shouldn't charge more for cash than not, to be honest, this is my belief, and now, because we are not defining exemptions now, it can be anything, and something that I might agree completely, and I might disagree completely, and I think it to be too much included or too less included, and because it's been confirmed it doesn't need to come back to the Assembly, it really depends on the minister who will be developing this policy in charge. And as we know, the individuality coming really strong into this space.
Would the member give way to some maybe helpful intervention?
Deputy Gardner, do you give way?
It's just to say that I would envisage that it would actually have to come back to the Assembly, because any exemptions would probably need to have some kind of legal law change. It may be a change to the consumer protection law, and therefore for it to have effect, I think it would need to come to the Assembly, and then future members would have a say. But I don't know if that's helpful, sir.
Well, my ruling was in relation to Part A of the proposition, the way it was worded. But anyway, that's...
I'll finish the speech. So it would be really helpful, and if we have Attorney General online to clarify.
It's not a matter for the
It's not a matter. So it would be helpful to clarify that it must come back to the Assembly or not. I think this is one of the things that it's sitting on my mind clearly. And the question how we build smart evidence-based policy that works for everyone, and everyone can be included without creating new problems in the process. So basically, how we protecting people without burdening and creating other complexities. And I will continue to listen to the debate, and I'm really grateful for everyone raising different points. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Gardner. Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. And I will be brief because I think we've talked about this a lot, and Deputy Gardner has raised all the issues. That is why I will be supporting Part A and B. But it was something that Deputy Gardner said about that she's been going between supporting A for or against. One of the areas she said was because she had listened to Deputy Morell, who obviously is the Minister for Economic Development, and as we heard yesterday, lobbies on behalf of the Jersey businesses in the island. And I just wanted to piqued my interest because this is not the first time we've talked about cash in society before. Obviously, Deputy Stevenson brought a proposition a few years ago on this very topic, but maybe related to sports clubs and for the government to be accepting cash. And I just wanted to quote Deputy Morell, and this is from Hansard, that I think it was important because, of course, then he was still the Minister for Economic Development. But I do agree that a review is not necessary, and quite simply, I think a better proposition, maybe the one we have now, rather than the one before us, would be one to make it effectively a law that cash has to be accepted by places, because I do believe we are talking about human rights here. And then further on in the debate, the Minister for Economic Development said whether we need a proposition to enshrine the kind of rights to cash transactions in Jersey, because what I have heard from the Minister for Treasury and Resources is that there is a slippery slope, that basically the desire by Treasury and others to not have to put up with cash, to be cheaper, to be quicker, to be more efficient, will rob us as a result of a fundamental human right, and that is the right to privacy, freedom and autonomy. And I think the Minister then was quite right. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Jean. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Ward. Rob Ward.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think the second part of this proposition we don't need to talk about. It's going to be agreed. In terms of the first part, I've been through a bit of a process with this because I've listened to everything. There are some groups that I really do have concerns for if we remove cash entirely. And I think so. We've got ourselves into a bit of absolutism here. It has to be all people are going to pay thousands of pounds in cash, or they're going to go entirely online. I don't think that reflects our society at all. I, sir, have my emergency £10 notes. Just check it's still there. It is, sir, in my phone with my driving licence. Probably could travel the world if I had my passport with me nowadays, because I don't use a lot of cash. However, I would not like the idea of not being able to use cash at all. And there are a number of reasons why. I think the removal of cash from our society disproportionately affects those on low incomes. One of the most difficult challenges that people face in the working world, those who work jobs day to day, is if they are moved from weekly pay to monthly pay. I know a number of people who, when they went through those processes, and I dealt with this both when I worked in a joint trade union group and as a deputy, it is a real struggle to move from that weekly pay when you are not get excess income in your lives. You work from week to week, and we must remember in this assembly that there are people and families who go from week to week, month to month. They don't have excessive amounts of money put away where they can say, oh, don't worry about it, we've overspent a little bit this month. Those are the families, sir, who when they have an unexpected cost, such as a car may need fixing because they use their car to go out at 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning to their first job, that actually have to pay for it there and then, and they struggle. Now, what we have, sir, is people using food banks when that happens. That's a reflection of our society, and we need to keep track of that. But there are people in our society who rely on cash because that's the way they can budget. So I look back to my dad, who's not around anymore, some time ago now. He was very much a working class man who knew about money, and he would not have survived in our modern world now with cards, etc. He would have really struggled. In his later years, he did struggle, and we had to go through a process. And I smile, so, because they're quite nice memories in one way, but they were not nice in other ways, because he was very much a cash is king person. And people still live in that way. So I am inclined to support the first part for those sections of our society. And also, sir, we have heard about elderly people. But it's not just elderly people, as I'm trying to say. But that's important. They should have the right to use cash where they can. And I think, sir, that those businesses who have gone mainly to online use or card use, they do have clientele who are ready to do that. And I don't think they're going to en masse change their behaviour simply because we're going to say you can use cash. It's something you get into. So I would also say, put a little shout out, sir, for the buskers on our island who provide music in the street, you know, putting a pound or so in a hat on the way past is not a bad thing to do, but if we don't have cash in our society, it'll be different. Not all of them will want to have a sum-up machine that they have to pay for. There's those who do lack the technological knowledge to participate in the ways that we want to. You know, I pay mostly now so on my phone because it's safer, because it's easier than cards. But I think there are many who will not and cannot do that, so we need to protect them. There is the issue of privacy. Some people may want to pay cash because they simply want privacy in their transactions, and I think there's nothing sinister in that. I think that's fair enough. We need to protect people's privacy. And so, just on the final note, I can remember when my kids were little, we used to give them, Jersey pound notes are great, sir, if you're a parent, because because we used to give them £1 and it looked like such a lot of money. It's a great way of cutting down the amount of money. It still is, indeed, sir. So you can give a couple of pounds to your children and they save up. And I can remember my kids saving up their money. In fact, sir, I have to say this. I had a terrible memory this morning because my son, I hope he's not listening to this, he's so embarrassed. He saved up for weeks and weeks and weeks for this toy, and I can remember this, and we went to buy it, and it was a huge disappointment for him, and he was so upset. And when I was thinking about this debate, I thought about that. And I thought about that for one simple reason, is that children need to know what money is. The reality of what money is. It is a physical thing for them as well. This is worth this amount of money. We do need to educate them about online use of money. And again, move away from this absolutism. We need to do both. Yes, you have a card, you may have money paying into your bank account. We need to educate. In fact, sir, there is just launched the information for children about their tax project that's going on through the tax office in education. So of course we need to do that. But that physical value of what money, physical reality of what money is, I think is also very important. And to put it simply, sir, my children, when they open the cards from their aunts and uncles and their grandparents that had 10 or 20 pounds in it.
Just a moment, Deputy. We're wondering whether we're quorate.
That's punishment. I'm going to start all over again. Oh, no.
How many online?
There's few online.
So how many are we? We are just quorate.
Thank you, sir.
I invite members to come
I'll
back
be finished
in
in a moment, so they can all come back.
Yeah.
It's okay. It reminds me of the time I busked, so I didn't make a lot of money. But I have done it. There we go. With my 5 chords and the truth. I've lost track of where it was. But anyway, I just want to say, I think I am minded to support the first bit for all of those reasons. And I really do urge members and say, remember, there is a section of our society who does live week to week, month to month. We must never forget that. in what we do. And I think cash for those people and for people, elderly and younger people, is important still. So I will be supporting the first part of this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Balash.
Sir, I just want to draw attention to some practicalities. I'm sure that every member of the Assembly agrees that paragraph B of the proposition should be adopted for all the reasons given by Deputy Ferry and indeed others. But paragraph A seems to me to be otiose. What the proposition asks us to do is to request the Council of Ministers, to take the necessary steps to ensure that from January 2028, businesses selling in-person goods and services must accept cash. Now, it's true that the question of what are reasonable exemptions is to be developed by the Council of Ministers, but the obligation upon businesses to accept cash can only be imposed by law. We will need to have primary legislation in order to impose an obligation upon businesses to accept cash. In order to have primary legislation, instructions will have to be drawn up for the legislative drafter. In order to draw up instructions for the legislative drafter, a policy will have to be established. People will have to know what they want to do, what the exemptions are going to be. All those details of whether little cafes, which at the moment operate very successfully without accepting cash, are going to be required in future to do so. And that will need to be settled before the instructions can be drawn up. So what is the Council of Ministers going to do? Are they going to say, well, we'll issue some broad instructions to the law drafter to draw up some law, and Deputy Renouf says we don't really need to think about this beforehand because we don't need to know what the policy is because we know what the answer is already. But I'm not sure that we do know what the answer is. Anyway, even if some people do think they know the answer, the instructions for the legislative drafter are going to be extremely difficult to draw up without the Council of Ministers settling, first of all, what their policy is. In other words, producing a policy paper which is going to be debated by the states as well. So I'm not sure that paragraph A serves any useful purpose. I think it will cause some difficulty for officials because they will have to consider whether or not they should be acting in accordance with a mandate of the states or whether they should do the sensible thing and wait until the Council of Ministers has settled its policy.
Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. And it's obviously slightly strange that this debate has turned into a process debate rather than the principal point, which I think the mover was wanting us to think about, because there's been universal agreement on the importance of cash for those marginalised in our community and for delivering inclusion. There's also been commentary made about that cash can provide privacy. Well, of course, that's only to a certain extent because cash has to be taken from somewhere. And we know that the banking sector is highly regulated. And so it comes really down to the question of then process. And I know that the mover of the proposition has done a lot of work. His scrutiny panel has done consultation, and it's had a number of members of the public reporting to it. It's had a number of ministers being grilled before it. And the Deputy has now brought this proposal to the Assembly, really arising out of his scrutiny work. And the Council of Ministers stands by its second set of comments. Of course it does. They were superseded. Other members have suggested that or focused their commentary on the first set of comments. And that is that we are, as a Western society, at many tipping and turning points. The use of technology is one of those, and at least one member talked about the changes in payment systems, and we're only just seeing the start of that. The technology that some banks are already using. If we think about the challenger banks, which we don't yet have in Jersey, but we would like to, the way that their customers, to a very large extent, don't access cash at all. It is purely an online process. So the world is changing, and it is appropriate for the government, post the scrutiny review, to do the policy work that we've just heard Deputy Balash refer to. And for my part, it is the wrong way round to agree to legislate in advance of that policy work, because I agree that legislation will be required. And I don't think it's appropriate for us as an Assembly to say, we're agreeing now to legislate, and then we're going to do the policy work and do all the consultation. Because I know that the Deputy says in Part A that legislation should be brought forward in consultation with stakeholders. And Part B says do all of the policy work and do the policy. It absolutely has to be right that we do the policy work first and then we agree the legislation. Because as Deputy Ferry said, there are many issues to consider. Jersey's banks don't have a legal requirement to provide basic bank accounts, but they all do provide basic bank accounts. What they do is contribute towards the community savings bank for those people who fall through the net. Now, for my part, the service that they get at Community Savings Bank, and I'm responsible for representing banks in this in this Assembly, the service those individuals get at Community Savings Bank is far better and helps those individuals who are excluded for all the reasons that the Deputy said. You know, banks actually find it very difficult to comply with their regulatory approaches and deal with people who are coming out of prison. And therefore there is a quite broad piece of policy work that needs to be undertaken. We then, someone else mentioned anti-money laundering requirements. There is a limit to the amount of cash that both individuals and banks can take. So these are important issues that need to be considered in this policy work, and I think that's what the Deputy actually wants in the policy work. But I think we are all agreed that we must do what is necessary to ensure that cash remains in our community for all of the reasons that we said. Some members have said and criticised the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. For my part, that's extremely unfair. Of course, he has a role in this Assembly to represent business and represent the voice of business. And let's be clear, out there in the high street, that's hard work, because we are mostly choosing to not spend money in the high street, but to spend money online. And that also is part of what we will need to consider, because there are some some retailers that, for their own reasons, take only card payments. Difficult for me to understand, because I'm of the school that if you're going to pay for the product, then a customer that's paying is always right, and if they want to pay by cash, then they should be jolly well allowed to pay by cash. But for those organisations, institutions and retailers that currently don't, there will be a cost implication if, when we bring forward the legislation, we say that they are legally required to provide cash. That might be the infrastructure in the shop, it might be the overnight holding of cash. So if we are going to deliver what we want, which is a wide use of cash, which we already have a wide access to banking facilities. If you take 100,000 people and put 100,000 people in a large country, we have better access to cash than lots of other large places. But if we want to maintain that, and we want to maintain that through a legal framework, then we must do the policy work and we must do the consultation in advance. Because we all know that often, rightly or wrongly, we are accused of not listening. We are accused that our mind has already been made up. You've already decided that this is what you are going to do in advance of consulting with whatever sector. And if we agree A today, as well as B, it would be strange to agree A and not B, then I believe that that will be a charge that can be rightly made against us. We've already decided what the outcome will be prior to even doing the policy work. So I don't think it is appropriate to accept A. My preference and the preference of the Council of Ministers and the commentary in the Council of Ministers comment is we'll do the policy work and then we'll be able to deliver a framework which will of course have to consider how that framework is implemented once that policy work has been done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. It's been a really interesting debate. I've enjoyed hearing the different perspectives on it. And I thank Deputy Tadyer for bringing the proposition and the work that he's done around this, including with his scrutiny panel. There isn't a whole amount much more that I can add to the debate on the points that others have made. I think there were just two arguments that I wanted to put a counter view towards, or in the first instance to correct something a member said yesterday, and it's perhaps against my better judgment that I rise to do this, but this member I think has made this incorrect point more than once, I have to, and that was what Deputy Stevenson said in her speech yesterday about a previous proposition saying that a minister had called her proposition on cash use boring. I believe that was a reference to me, and it's not accurate, sir, because if she goes back to that debate, she'll actually find I was calling the government amendment to that proposition boring, and I maintain that because it was. I didn't call her proposition boring, and it's very disappointing that she repeated that when she could have checked that. But I think moving on to what will hopefully be a more constructive point, sir, is that Deputy Gorst, as a skilled parliamentary debater, as I called him earlier this week, did make what I think many will regard as a good argument for getting things the right way round, and others have made a similar point on that. Everybody seems to be perfectly happy with Part B to this proposition, but are wondering if Part A might be putting the cart before the horse, and I want to make the case for why I don't think that's right, and why I think that often our political indecisiveness and our often instinct to kick things down the road actually leads to us wasting spectacular amounts of time and money in government and causing disillusionment. I think it's far better than to go into a consultation with the public acting as if you have a complete open mind on all of the issues, when in actual fact you don't have an open mind on some of those. I think makes part of that consultation just not worth having. If you already know what outcome you want, consulting on it as if you have an open mind is a waste of time, and I think the public see right through that. There are two examples recently where that's been the case, sir. There was the consultation on the proposed residential tenancy law that happened before my time in office. That was largely a waste of time because it came from a political perspective of not having any settled views on what ought to happen in the end. So the feedback that was obtained through it was not particularly useful. But more relevant to this sitting was the consultation on the removal of interest tax relief on buy-to-let mortgages, where I said at several points during that process that it didn't matter what that consultation said because people would already have a fixed political view on it anyway, and lo and behold, that's exactly what the comments to that have shown. So I think it actually is a much better idea to resolve on part A of this proposition today based on principle of whether you agree with what part A is asking for or not to dismiss it for the reasons that Deputy Gorse suggests, which is that it's putting the cart before the horse. No, vote on it based on whether you think it's the right thing or not to do, and set out right from the start that when the work is done for part B, the public will know in advance what the direction of travel is and can provide more useful contributions to that about the how, not the if. Too often we go to the public without having settled the if and end up not doing the work on the how, and that ends up elongating these processes for delivering change, and it's one of the core areas I think where government is extremely inefficient and wastes huge amounts of money. So I would say that if you agree in principle with what part A is asking for, then vote in favour of it. Don't vote against it because you would prefer to see the outcome of part B first, because I think that that won't be a satisfactory way of proceeding and will end up elongating this process more than it needs to be. And for what it's worth, sir, I'll vote in favour of all parts of the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Mezek. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Tadier to reply.
Thank you, sir. Can I first of all thank all members who have spoken? I think we've had quite a number of speakers and it's been a fairly wide-ranging and I think generally constructive debate, sir. So let's talk about process. So I think Deputy Gorse is correct that the reason this is now focusing on process is effectively because nobody's got a good enough argument to vote against either Part A or Part B. So I'm taking that as read that apart from maybe one or two voices in the Assembly, that we've heard, one remotely, I think, is that Part A is actually a good thing to do, that actually businesses in Jersey should be accepting cash, that's the general rule, and that there would be reasonable exemptions. And I also draw members' attention to the preamble to this proposition because nobody's really picked up on that. So before Parts A and Part B, after it says the states are asked to decide whether they are of the opinion, are of opinion, I always put the definite article in there, it doesn't have it, that people in Jersey should have a right and expectation to be able to pay for in-person purchases of goods and services using cash, and to request the Council of Ministers to do the following. So that is very much the preamble. So the starting point for us here is, if we're voting for either Part A or Part B, is that people in Jersey should have a right and an expectation to be able to pay for things, so goods and services, that they make in person. So we're not talking about Amazon. I think there was a big red herring that came from Deputy Scott there, saying that online businesses wouldn't be able to set up in Jersey. It's a nonsense because when you're online, it's not an in-person good or service that you're purchasing, not within the scope of either Part A or B. So that's the starting point that we're agreeing on, sir. And actually Part A and B are separate. They can they're modular, if you like. They can be taken completely separately. You could have A standing on its own without Part B. You could have Part B on its own without Part A. And the reason, in fact, I put Part B in is actually because when I was talking to people, and when we got feedback both on a personal level but also as a panel level, we did get the feedback from businesses that one of the reasons they felt they were being pushed towards preferring card payments rather than cash is because banks were putting onerous costs on them, or that they're likely to increase costs on them that didn't exist before. So Part B is really there primarily to say that if we're doing A already, then it's only fair to also look at things like the fees that banks charge. So really, Part B is predicated on Part A in many ways for me. That's the whole logic of it. I could have put Part A on its own. I think that would have had a more focused debate, and I dare say it would have focused the Council of Ministers to try and take a political position. Goodness forbid that they would need to do that, rather than actually come out with the lowest common denominator, saying, yeah, we'll do something, just like we did something on empty property taxes or on any other number of things, like maybe the FOI law. I was talking to Deputy Labby about, the Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Labby, in fact, about that before. And you make an in-principle decision, and the risk is if we only put Part B forward, that we just get to 2030, and we'll be in exactly the same situation, and the government says, oh yeah, we haven't done anything of this, because of course there was no state's decision that was taken on this. We don't know what the direction of travel is. We were only asked to come up with a policy paper, and of course the policy paper was probably going to be directed by the same people who are currently in office, who don't agree with forcing businesses to take cash. That's the evidence they've already given us. So I think by only adopting Part B, not Part A, we're actually hamstringing, if that's the right word, the future government to not make a decision, whereas Part A gives clear a direction of travel about what this Assembly, this outgoing Assembly, would like the future Council of Ministers to do. And let's take a look at that wording again. It's been deliberately worded in that way. So after the preamble, take the necessary steps, because we've made a majority decision in here that we think it is right that businesses should accept cash. But we also accept that there might be reasonable exemptions, because we don't know whether we want to go down the French, the Norway model, the increasingly European model where all businesses are supposed to take cash, or whether we go for a more nuanced, I think, Australian model. Sweden haven't actually developed their model yet, but they are moving back away from the race towards a cashless society, and they're looking at things like groceries, pharmacies, possibly cafes, and some government services that must accept cash. So that's definitely the direction of travel. And I'm interested actually in Deputy Morell's comments, because usually Deputy Morell is somebody who doesn't want to blindly follow what the UK is doing. And in this particular policy area, the UK is the outlier. Europe and many other parts of the world, many US states in fact, are legislating, and legislating isn't a dirty word. We do it all the time. We've been doing it for the last week, and we did it in the last sitting. And when we talk about new primary legislation that might be required here, what we're actually talking is about an amendment to a pre-existing law. And it's very likely, and there are more than one way to do it. It could be done through the discrimination law, but more likely, I would be asking ministers to look very closely at the consumer protection laws, and it could be simply another article in the consumer protection law which says about unfair practices, and it would be considered an unfair practice or an undesirable practice to refuse somebody's right to pay cash unless you have good reasons for not accepting that. And the exemptions wouldn't necessarily just be on the basis of the type of business, to answer Deputy Gardner's point. It would also include limits. So, of course, if somebody goes into a shop with £10,000 and wants to buy a new car, well, that's already covered under the anti-money laundering reporting. If they want to go into, I don't know, a CD shop, if they still exist, or a bookshop, and buy a whole load of books, which is going to cost £900 in cash, I think there's going to be limits of what's discretionarily allowed. But the presumption is that you shouldn't reasonably refuse cash if that's what somebody wants to pay in. So these things will be developed, and that's the whole point of Part A, and that is a consultation in its own right. So that's why Part A talks about, in consultation with stakeholders, do this by January 2028. In order to do that by January 2028, you will need to have lodged something by then anyway, probably 6 months, ideally in advance, and you will have consulted, and that there will be something tangible, so that this policy for cash inclusion in Jersey will be in place by January 2028. Would that slip? It may well slip. You know, I'm realistic. It might be that we don't get that policy till January 2029. But that's what we're signing up to as an assembly. This is a decisive action. And I do want to make the case as to why we should be doing that in summing up, sir. Deputy Jeune, I think, eagle-eyed as ever, focused on the comments that I put of the current Sustainable Economic Development Minister, who, making personal comments, I think, unequivocally, you know, was saying that he thinks businesses in Jersey should be accepting cash, and that we need a proposition, is what he said. We need a proposition, not a review, in front of us that would require businesses to accept cash. Well, we have that proposition in front of us, Deputy Morell, as you desired. And where is Deputy Morell now, and how will he vote on that, either as a minister or as a representative for St Lawrence, St John and Trinity? I think I'd certainly like his votes on both parts. And when we spoke to Deputy Morell as minister during our review, and because he'd already mentioned this idea of a slippery slope, and I've put this in my report, sir, are we sleepwalking to a point of no return? So the idea of a slippery slope that Deputy Morell referred to in that debate is mirrored elsewhere in wider debates about whether some countries are sleepwalking into a cashless society. And the chair of the UK Select Committee that I referred to in my opening speech, so with their review, Dame Meg Hillier, who I know some members of the Assembly will know, who was the chair of the UK Parliamentary Treasury Select Committee. They looked at that and they came up with this comment. They said, as a society, we must avoid sleepwalking into a situation where cash is no longer widely accepted. The government needs to take this seriously. And I think those comments are equally valid in the Jersey context. Jersey, as a small society, as a small community, must avoid sleepwalking into a situation where cash is no longer widely accepted, and the government needs to take this seriously. So this is an excerpt from one of our hearings where we had Deputy Morell in as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. And the question I put to him, is there a valid argument, Minister, that says actually government needs to intervene to stop that critical point passing where there's no choice left for customers? The response was, at the moment, I think we are in a place where enough businesses are currently accepting cash for it not to be a problem and not to need to regulate. But there may come a point where if we are heading towards 100% of businesses only accepting electronic payments, then we might want to say, because we know there are people in this society who want to use cash, who prefer using cash for very good reasons, that they need to be protected in that way. So what Deputy Morell is saying is that if we get to a point where it looks like 100% of businesses are not accepting cash, that's probably the point at which we might need to take action as a government. And my question, perhaps quite obviously, is there not a risk about government intervening too late in that process? Because if you intervene when 90% of businesses have gone cashless, that is presumably much more disruptive in order to implement that. And the response, you are absolutely right. So the point there is that the minister, and I think ministers, all ministers, if they search their hearts, will know that there is a window of opportunity here. We have a scenario, when I got my £10 note out earlier, where that £10 note still does have the currency in St Helier, but it's increasingly reducing. If I want to spend that tenner, I have to think now about which coffee shops I can go to and which ones I can't go to. And I already know that there are 3 I can't go to. I'm not welcome to spend my cash in those shops. But there are others that I'm not sure about. In fact, some I go to, and actually I find that they've just changed the policy. So at what point do we intervene? And I say this is a window of opportunity now to do that. I don't think I'm going to go through all of the arguments that have been made, although I have made notes for all of the speakers. I can, though, if anyone feels left out. But I want to maybe single out a couple of speeches that really stuck out to me. The first one is Deputy Miles. She speaks so well often, and she's always well prepared. I was asked for a copy of my opening speech this morning by a journalist, and I said, I don't have one because I don't tend to write them, but look on the video. In brackets, do some work. I didn't say that, but if he's listening, he will be listening to that now. And the point that, the great quote that I'd not heard from before, and I may plagiarise it in the future, is that Deputy Miles said that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think that's what we're talking about. Diversity in this context is saying, yeah, you can take cash out of the bank by all means. We're not going to, government saying we're not going to take your cash away. But inclusion is saying that you can use that cash, and government will protect your right to dance, i.e. to use that cash widely, and we will make an intervention. And it's tough, because if you're an ideological politician who doesn't want to intervene in the market at any costs, that is going to be a difficult thing for one to do. But you have to balance that, as I've said previously, with the harms. I'm not ideological in that sense. I think that, yeah, free market is great, but the free market can't resolve all problems. And what I also thought of, following on from Deputy Miles's comment, that we're really talking about access here, aren't we? So if we're not talking about cash, but we were talking about a physical building, we know that access and inclusion and diversity have come on a long way, even in the last decades, let alone in the last 50 years, in the last few years, rather than, and in the last decades. And we're talking about a historic building which has got steps to go into. We know that the simple thing you do for buildings is that you have steps and you have a slope. And for good measure, you have a handrail. That means that that building is at least on a basic level accessible to so many more people. People who struggle with steps for so many reasons. They don't have to be in a wheelchair. They might just not be able to lift their feet up. Having the rail going up the slope, that's going to help so many more people access that. And this is all we're saying here. We're saying electronic is great, if that suits you. The bit of plastic, if that suits you. And have you noticed we're also being pushed away from using plastic? Because, of course, when you get your phone out to tap, you never get asked for your PIN number, I don't think. I think it's really difficult to. But you know, so we're being pushed in a direction, but we're saying, actually, whatever your method of payment, that's great. So when my tenner is in the bank, the way I look at that is that the bank don't own my £10 notes, they're looking after it for me. And if I want to access that £10, I can do it in three ways. I can do it by taking the money physically from the bank. I'll have that tenner in my hand, or I can take the money out at the point of purchase with the card or with the phone. But ultimately, it's about giving choice to people in this. I do have to address Deputy Scott's points. It might be the last opportunity to cross swords with her, sir, in a debate. Sir, she accused me of playing on the fears of older people, and I completely refute that. Actually, what I'm trying to do here is listen to the concerns, not just of older people, actually, because as we've established previously, being old doesn't mean that you're digitally illiterate, but it does mean that perhaps you're more likely to succumb to other conditions, and there will be comorbidities in future. But younger people will need to access and use cash, as Deputy Miles reminded us, for a whole host of reasons. And the whole argument about Amazon is not correct. So this argument, but her argument seemed to be basically that the free market will save us. The free market will resolve all these issues, but I'm afraid the free market isn't doing that. If people are being pushed on the one hand by banks to not accept cash because cash is expensive and it's a hassle, then I'm afraid that there is a need for intervention. We wouldn't say to a company that we didn't need to legislate for guide dogs or for wheelchairs. You know, we could say to a company, if we were being purist, that they shouldn't need to accept people in a wheelchair because there's an extra cost. You might only be able to get 3 wheelchairs into your small cafe when you can get maybe 6 or 9 other paying customers. Why should that be an imposition on businesses? You might have to put that handrail or that slope up to get into your restaurant or to your shop. That's just a normal thing that businesses do to be inclusive. Accepting cash is a normal thing that businesses should do to be inclusive, sir. So I'm not going to go through all these comments. I think all the comments have been made. I do ask members to be courageous in this. I think we are here to make strong and decisive decisions, and I will simply reiterate the point that Deputy Miles eloquently said, that diversity is to invite people to the party, inclusion is to invite them to dance. Let's invite all of our people in Jersey, including the tourists who come to Jersey, to use cash, to take part in our party, to enjoy their time in Jersey, to be able to dance by using cash and proudly use it in all of our businesses, sir. I make the proposition, sir. And because, of course, Part B without Part A would actually be, I think, meaningless, I'm moving this en bloc, sir.
Do you call for the appel, Deputy? The appel is called for. I ask members to return to their seats. Deputy Howell, you have your light on.
I just wonder, sir, are we allowed to ask for it in parts?
No. If all members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. And if all members have now cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. 31 votes pour, 8 votes contre, and 2 abstentions.
Those members voting contre, the Connétable, St Helier, St Brelard and Trinity, and Deputies Luce, Gorst, Balash, War and Scott, and Deputies Morell and Howell abstained.
Thank you. So we move on to the next item of public business, which is P49, the Draft Companies Amendment Number 2 law. That's been lodged by the Minister for External Relations. The main respondent is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Companies Jersey Amendment Number 2 Law 2000, a law to further amend the Companies Jersey Law 1991, the states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. The Draft Companies Jersey Amendment Number 2 Law proposes the introduction of an administration procedure in order to provide an alternative option for a Jersey company which is facing insolvency. Where there is a reasonable likelihood that the company can be rescued in whole or in part, or that there could be a more advantageous realisation of the company's assets than would be achieved in a winding up, an application can be made to the Royal Court for an administration order and the appointment of an administrator. This gives the company a window of opportunity to try and sort out its difficulties with the assistance of a professional court-appointed administrator. As the law currently stands, we do not have a true rescue procedure in our armoury. The provisions relating to disaster or winding up all lead to the termination of the company. Sometimes, with some breathing space and professional input, termination can be avoided. Even where it cannot, an administration may mean there is a more orderly process in place so that there are higher returns for creditors and a better outcome generally, including for any employees. Similar schemes exist in other jurisdictions, such as in Guernsey and in England and Wales, and have been seen to work well with other remedies to offer a comprehensive regime, striking an appropriate balance between creditor and debtor. As with previous amendments to the law in this area, this builds on existing principles, and by following established concepts and tried and tested procedures will be familiar to practitioners and intermediaries within the island and from further afield. as well as benefiting the many Jersey companies owned by local residents operating within the island. The proposals respect the position of Jersey as an international finance centre, which recognises and protects the interests of creditors. The rights of secured creditors are preserved, including as to enforcement, thereby ensuring that the island's reputation as a creditor-friendly jurisdiction, whilst also providing appropriate protections for the debtor company, is unaffected. In brief, the process is that an application is made to the Royal Court. Notice must be given to various parties who can make representations to the court at the hearing. The amendment will be supported by an accompanying order, which will confirm that notice of the application must be given also to secured creditors, who will have the opportunity to make representations to the court as to, for example, the making of the order and the appointment of the administrator. This is being done by order so as to enable minor adjustments to the definition of a secured creditor to be made swiftly, if necessary, once it is seen how it works in practice. The proposals have been subject to a public consultation. Officers have worked with the Viscount, the Judicial Greffier, the Jersey Financial Services Commission, and a working group comprising representatives from various law firms and the Association of Restructuring and Insolvency Experts to ensure that the amendments are appropriate. As in the case with all changes to financial services legislation, I must of course record my thanks to all those in industry and across government and the other stakeholders who have expended considerable time and effort to develop and refine these proposals. I'd also like to extend my sincere thanks to the Economy and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel for their diligent scrutiny of this legislation and thoughtful reflections on the amendments. Sir, I propose the principles.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Wilson.
So, Deputy Tadier isn't here, but I rise. Yes.
Spending his £10 note.
Just to say that as a panel we did review this law, and just to summarise that that was informed by briefings from government officers. It was explained that there were several older regimes currently in place, but they will all operate as termination procedures, which is what the reason for the change was. We looked at the administration processes. We asked whether there were any circumstances in which a company would not be placed into administration, and we heard about the process that the court would have in relation to the discretion that they would have around that process. We also talked about the administrators, and we raised a matter of the management of potential conflicts of interest, but we had assurances the administrator must follow their professional code of conduct, and it was further highlighted that the approved list of practitioners would have oversight from the Viscount. There wasn't anything else that we were particularly concerned about, other than whether there would be any financial support available to a company, and the officer explained that the administrator would determine the most appropriate course of action in that regard. We were also advised that the draft law had been discussed by a company's law working group, which the Minister's just referred to, and that included representatives from local law firms, the Association of Restructuring and Insolvency Experts, the Jersey Financial Services Commission and the Viscount. And the panel was advised that there was broad support for the proposals, and on that basis, sir, we're satisfied that the draft law is consistent with the approach taken in comparable jurisdictions, and that the proposed administration procedure would provide an alternative mechanism to support distressed companies rather than requiring them to wind up. So we support the proposition.
Thank you very much, Deputy Wilson. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful to the Vice Chair of the panel standing in when her chair's gone out to spend his £10. Sir, I maintain the amendments in in principle and call for the appel. Thank you.
Call for the appel. I invite members to return to their seats. And if members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, then I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, if members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the principles have been adopted. 35 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. Minister, how do you wish to propose the, does the scrutiny panel wish, Deputy Wilson, does the scrutiny panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
Sir.
Minister, how do you wish to propose the articles in second
I
reading?
realise it's reasonably lengthy, but I propose them en bloc, and I'll endeavour to ask any questions that members may have, sir. Thank you.
Does any member wish to speak in second reading? If no member wishes to speak, then I close the debate. Minister, do you wish to say anything? Would those members in favour of adopting the articles in second reading kindly show? Those against? The articles are adopted in second reading. Minister, do you wish to propose the amended law in third reading?
If I may, sir. Thank you, yes.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? If no member wishes to speak in third reading, then I call upon the Minister to reply.
So I'm not sure if we quite seconded that, but I'm sure the Chief Minister did.
Third reading, seconded, sir.
Grateful to have that seconding, Chief Minister. Thank you.
May I call for the appel, sir, please?
You call for the appel. If members have returned to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the amended law has been adopted unanimously in third reading, 40 votes pour, no votes contre, and no abstentions. So we move on to the next item of public business, which is the removal of interest tax relief for buy-to-let mortgages, which is P51. That has been lodged by Deputy Catherine Curtis of St Helier Central. The main respondent is the Minister for Treasury and Resources. So I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The stakes are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for Treasury and Resources to undertake all necessary actions to remove interest tax relief on buy-to-let mortgages, with such change to be reflected in the draft budget, Government Plan 2027 to 2030 and any related legislation.
Deputy Catherine Curtis. Sorry, you have your lights on, Deputy Jean and Deputy Rose Binnon and Deputy Tadier.
So I'd just like to declare that I've got a buy-to-let mortgage along with my brother, so I need to know whether I'm allowed to vote or not, please.
I also have a buy-to-let mortgage.
Deputy Tadier.
Yes, sir, I don't, but my wife does, so that's an interest I need to declare.
Yes. Deputy Gorse.
So do I, sir.
Any other member wish to make a declaration? The declarations are noted, but I think we've had this discussion previously, and Deputy Morel.
Yes, I'd just like to make the same declaration, sir.
Thank you. And it is an interest that is shared by a wide range of the population, so it does not mean that whilst the declaration is properly made, it does not mean that you have to abstain from voting. So Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Members may recall that in the budget debate last year, Deputy Wall brought an amendment to reintroduce mortgage interest tax relief for homeowners. And when considering that mortgage interest tax relief is no longer available for homeowners, in his report, Deputy Wall stated, "It is an anomaly that those with mortgages on second homes are still entitled to tax relief on their mortgage." And I agree, it is just plain wrong that landlords with a mortgage get mortgage interest tax relief when owners with just one property do not. Unfortunately, the majority of states members voted against reintroducing mortgage interest tax relief for homeowners during last year's debate. I had brought an amendment to that amendment to remove the mortgage interest tax relief from buy-to-let homes, and that narrowly missed being voted through. 19 votes pour and 21 contra. At the time, the Treasury Minister said that any vote on this matter should wait until a consultation had concluded. Well, we now have the results of that consultation, so members have the opportunity to vote on this matter while considering the long-awaited consultation. Just a few words about the consultation process. It was made in response to Deputy Mesick's amendment brought in 2023. That original proposition required the use of the Fiscal Policy Panel's housing market review as the basis for determining next steps, and that has not been done. Instead, the work was done by the Economics Unit. This protracted consultation resulted in a response by just 18 respondents, 11 of whom stated that they are or were landlords. So no one can reasonably say that it is representative, and therefore it is not worth using as a base for decision making. I was disappointed to read the comments attributed to the economic advisor, not because I disagree. Of course, he's right in what he says. I'm disappointed that the matter has been taken out of context and considered in a reductionist way. The Treasury Minister's comments completely ignore the bigger picture, that housing has become too expensive, and therefore we should not be encouraging it as an investment above the needs of homeowners. If this is how government assesses policy and makes decisions, then no wonder we are in such a mess with too expensive housing and a high cost of living. The conclusion in the Treasury Minister's comments paper is ironic, that this proposition should be rejected to avoid damaging unintended consequences when you consider where the business as usual policy has got us to now. The appended report describes mortgage interest tax relief on buy-to-let mortgages as expense as being incurred in the course of business. But of course, renting out property is not just a business. It's the acquisition of a valuable asset. More importantly, it provides housing to nearly half our population. Housing is an integral part of our society, both for health, well-being, and the economy. Over the years, it has got dangerously out of kilter. Promoting housing as an investment rather than prioritising it as homes has got us in a mess. So I state again that housing investment and provision cannot only be considered solely as a business. It has a huge impact on our island, and regarding it solely in business terms is wholly irresponsible. Removing mortgage interest tax relief from buy-to-let mortgages is estimated to raise £2 million per year. At a time when Jersey needs to increase its revenue base, it's obvious that this is a clear way to bring an extra £2 million into the government funds or to be spent on islanders more generally. I've often heard the phrase, nice to have, and that Jersey needs to cut its public spending, starting with nice to haves. Well, mortgage interest relief on buy-to-lets is very much just a nice to have. If it's stopped, the world will carry on. There will still be rentals. The 80% of rental properties which are held mortgage-free will be entirely unaffected. The remainder of rental properties which do have a mortgage will continue to be a valuable asset in their own right with tax-free capital gains. If some of this minority of landlords sell up, their property will be bought as a home to live in or by another landlord. Government policy so far has favoured property as an investment, but look where that's got us, some of the most expensive housing in the world. Young people leaving because they can't afford to live here with the resulting ageing society. And we are no longer in the 1980s. It's well past the time when government should have acknowledged that promoting homes as an investment vehicle, while it's benefited some individuals, has overall damaged the island. This proposition allows a move towards some correction. So to sum up, firstly, allowing mortgage interest tax relief on buy-to-let homes, but not owner-occupied homes, is inequitable. It is wrong. Secondly, there is a strong economic argument against it. Housing has become too expensive, pricing families out of living here, meaning our economy based on taxing working people is becoming less sustainable, and therefore we should not currently be favouring housing as an investment above the needs of homeowners. Thirdly, if this change goes ahead, rentals will continue. The great majority of landlords do not have a mortgage. And I ask States members to consider this matter in context and to support the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Curtis. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. I will not be supporting this proposition at this time, and my reasons for that decision are as follows. The proposed changes, I feel, are poorly timed following the other recent changes made in the rental market and the impact they will make on it, where further investment needs to be made to comply with these new regulations. This proposal will affect other businesses, especially the lifeline of some of our small businesses we have on the island who invest in business property mortgages. The removal of interest tax relief for some smaller landlords may be just the last straw to push them into negative equity or even withdraw from the open market, especially with mortgage rates creeping up again. This will impact on our local economy and might actually reduce taxes earned because of less properties means less rent, means less tax. The removal of tax relief will only result in increased rents to cover the costs of that lost tax relief, which will only result in the consumer being asked to pay more, whether that be in the private domestic rental area or on the high street. Interest tax relief on borrowings is a legitimate business deduction, which is able to be used by all businesses in Jersey. And landlords are no different because they're all small businesses. Landlords are not the same as a homeowner. Landlords get rent from their properties, which is taxed for everyone's benefit. Homeowners don't get rent. Comparing the two is not comparing apples with apples. Removing interest tax relief violates, I believe, a foundational principle of business taxation. It's profits, not revenue, that should be taxed. We've been advised recently that Jersey must promote a positive position to the wider business community to attract global investment, stating we are open to business to come to Jersey and invest. These new businesses will look at Jersey's economic environment and the removal of tax relief incentives on landlord borrowings. Imposing the removal of the tax relief could well, in my view, sir, it could deter new businesses from making new investments, as it's contrary to the normal business practice. Due to the volatility of world events that we are seeing today, this proposition will make things worse for the cost of borrowing now that mortgage interest rates are increasing again. Businesses will be very cautious of investing if normal business practices are affected by the removal of a business-related buy-to-let tax relief. If I may say, sir, relate to members from the recent comment from our chief economist on the 23rd of March, which echoes my concerns, and he states a warning, and I quote, "Removing interest deductions will leave landlords with mortgages with a higher tax bill and lower profits. All else being equal, such landlords can be expected to increase rents to offset the reduction in profit. Alternatively, landlord might well sell their properties." We, sir, as an Assembly, need to take heed of our highly respected senior advisors on such matters, as we should be doing our best to protect and help grow our economy, not bringing changes that could negatively affect the situation. So, members, I believe this proposal is short-sighted at this present time. Jersey will be out of step in the world of business by this proposal. Sir, I urge members to reject this proposition, and I thank you, sir, and members for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Barbara Ward. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I rise, basically thanks to Deputy Ward's speech there, because you talk quite frequently throughout her speech about property landlords as being a business. Of course, she's right in the sense that there are business loans that businesses can take out, and these business loans are, the interest paid on those loans is still tax deductible, and that will remain the case, sir. But my issue is when we talk about property ownership in this context, is it's not the same as any other business. We talk about some equipment that businesses have and need to provide. I'm just, for example, I'm sorry because he's normally in my line of sight, is brewery equipment, shall we say, sir. If a brewer wants to install a new vat, a new still to make his product, he would be able to get a loan for that, pay that interest off, and he has the product at the end that makes his product that he sells, because that's equipment that is used specifically for that business. So when we look at housing people and making sure that people are well homed and have a roof over their head, this should be a basic human right and not considered a business interest. And that's where I think some of this gets a little bit difficult, because we're actually choosing to treat home ownership in different contexts. As the proposer of this of this proposition said in their opening speech, that there was a try by Deputy War to bring equality back to mortgages by allowing mortgage interest relief for homeowners to balance the rights of people who are owning a home to be well protected and well looked after. Where, as myself, as a person with a mortgage, sir, I don't benefit from that interest relief after this year. Into next year, it completely disappears. And so why should somebody else who's able to make money out of putting a roof over someone's head, which should be considered a base human right, be able to reduce their tax because of this? But also the fact that when we talk about competition, should we really be encouraging competition to house people? Because that seems really a really strange thing. People should be able to be strongly and well supported. I also consider when we talk about this fear-mongering that landlords will put their rents up. So the residential tenancy law will be enacted by this point because it comes as the Minister has already given the order for it to start in April. That means landlords will not be able to increase their rents beyond RPI. So actually this notion that they would put up their rents to combat the lack of this interest relief fails at that point, but also fails in the fact that actually if they put their rents up, they still have to pay more tax anyway. It's a base 20% tax on all rent that comes in. That is fact, sir. So, sir, I'm supporting Deputy Curtis with her proposition here because I think it is right. If we're going to lose it, so the mortgage interest relief on someone who's owning just one home, why should we allow somebody to have it who's going to own multiple homes, sir?
Thank you, Deputy Coles. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then Deputy Meswick.
I can't believe I lost chicken so badly there, sir. But I was desperate to hear from the person who I believed was going to be acting as the main responder to this. Well, there we go, lesson learned. So I'm very grateful for Deputy Catherine Curtis for bringing this proposition and for her persistence as well, as of course she brought an amendment to the previous budget as well. I agree with every part of the argument that she makes, and I think that this is the right thing to do. There is a central point as to why this is different to ordinary business expenses, acquiring assets where you may have to pay interest on loans that would otherwise be deductible. And it is vital that people understand this difference. The difference, sir, is that when somebody is buying a home to acquire as an asset to then make money out of it, they are competing against people who aren't business people for that same asset, because the asset of a home is just a home. You don't have homes that are constructed as business assets and those that are constructed as homes for owner-occupiers. The bricks and mortar are the same. It's the same product, the same asset. But through our tax system, we currently provide an indirect subsidy through that tax relief to people who are buying those assets as investments to make money out of them, when just over 10 years ago, we made a decision to abolish that indirect subsidy for people who are buying those homes to live in. I remember those days, sir, 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago when that decision was made. They were dark days, sir, because we had public finances in a very difficult position at the time, and the then government, in response to that, proposed a damaging austerity package to save money that include lots of very regressive measures in it. Deputy Southern and Deputy Tadger and I remember the fight against that very well, where there were proposed cuts to support for people with disabilities, for pensioners, for single-parent households, etc. But that also included the decision to phase out mortgage interest relief for people who were buying their homes to live in. And you can make an argument for doing that, because as an indirect subsidy, it was an inefficient way of helping people into home ownership. And I would argue that the most efficient mechanisms that we've found recently have been those through Andium's Home Buy scheme and the First Step scheme. Those are very good ways of helping people into home ownership, where there is a fair economic argument to say that indirect subsidies through the tax system are not as efficient. Some people will take issue with that and find that difficult to comprehend, because many people did benefit from mortgage interest tax relief to buy their home. So there's different perspectives on it, but I can accept the argument. I can understand the argument that was made 10 years ago, even though I wasn't very happy about it and found that it came in a very dark context. But to have applied a double standard to it, which is what it is, to say if you're buying a home to live in, you don't get this indirect subsidy anymore, but if you're buying it to rent out for a profit, you do get that indirect subsidy, makes little sense. And in the speech from Deputy Barbara Ward before, she didn't address at all, and I suspect those who are against this proposition will also not address this point. The key one that was made by Deputy Catherine Curtis, which is that housing has got too expensive in Jersey. And that has happened over a period of time where there has been completely unsustainable growth in house prices, and that has happened because of bad decisions here. When the previous iterations of rent stabilisation and the Rent Control Tribunal were abolished, guess what? Rents started going up by more than inflation. And the stats from Jersey Statistics show that. In the years subsequent to the austerity budget, house prices went up at completely unsustainable rates. Often they were going up by more than the entire average salary in a year, meaning young people were literally seeing housing get the prospect of owning a home getting further and further away from them, and that being exacerbated for some of those people by the abolition of some tax relief that they had benefited from until that point. But not, sir, if you were going in to buy that same commodity, that asset, to then not live in it, but to make money from it, that indirect subsidy was preserved, all whilst housing was becoming too unaffordable and expensive. That was a bad decision, and it's about time that we corrected that. And there is, I think, a clear economic argument in favour of doing so, sir, because providing an indirect subsidy exclusively to those kind of purchasers increases their purchasing power compared to somebody trying to buy a home to live in. Is that what we consider to be right? That government, through its tax system, should provide an indirect subsidy to people so they can increase their purchasing power against prospective homeowners? Is that our priority? I would say I would hope it isn't, and I would think that the majority of the public would feel that way too. We ought to be supporting Jersey families to buy their own homes to live in and make their lives in, and we should not be providing indirect subsidies so others can essentially outbid them and help push house prices up further. And this proposition enables us to do so. And frankly, we should have done it much earlier. As Deputy Catherine Curtis pointed out, that there was a consultation on this, which is of very, very little use to us because of the little engagement it had. But it came about because of that debate in the budget at the end of 2023, where the Assembly did what it so often does, which is that it has the opportunity to make a choice, and instead of making that choice, it kicks the can down the road and says, well, we couldn't possibly do something without a consultation. And I said all throughout that time that the consultation would be a waste of time because it wouldn't change people's political views on it. If the consultation came back and said, what a brilliant idea, those who started off thinking it was a bad idea would not have their minds changed by that, and of course, vice versa. And lo and behold, that's exactly what has happened. And we've protracted this out far longer than it needed to be. So, sir, for those central reasons, I strongly support this proposition. I think it corrects a historic injustice. I think it does make economic sense because it seeks to not subsidise the purchasing power of investors for an asset that is a unique type of asset. It's not a piece of business equipment. It's not even a shop floor. It is a home, and homes look and feel identical irrespective of who is buying them. So they're not like other business assets where you could clearly make that intellectual case for why there ought to be interest relief on loans to buy those things. And I'm very pleased that Deputy Catherine Curtis gives the Assembly an opportunity to vote to correct all of that, and I certainly will be.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Gorst.
Thank you, sir. Before the Treasury Minister left to go to Paris, she handed me a bundle of speeches which I think the idea was I was supposed to deliver. One of them I avoided delivering because the debate was going the way that the government wanted it to go. We haven't got to any of the others up until this point, sir. I'm not sure if I should, depending on where we end the sitting today, there's one in here that I might be diametrically opposed to, but so I won't be giving that one. But let's see where we get to on the agenda. But here we are with this one where she was due to be the main responder. Members will be pleased to know that I'm not going to take advantage of the fact that I now have the floor. And so far, some contributions have been quite wide-ranging, going back over a number of years. But I do think some of those issues need and should be addressed. I think the first point I'd like to make is I've not yet heard any economic argument, despite the term economic argument being used. Haven't heard an economic argument yet, but and that's important because the mover of the proposition was disparaging about the economic advice from The Economist. And that, of course, is a political point.
Sir, can I just ask a point of order? I was not disparaging.
It's not a point of order.
Oh, sorry.
Do you ask for Deputy to give way?
Point of clarification?
Point of clarification?
I was not disparaging about the advice.
That's not a point of clarification.
But it was. Does the Minister accept that?
So if the Deputy would like to just remind us what she said about the economic advice, of course I may reconsider.
I said that I thought the advice was, I completely agreed with it and it was right, but it was being seen in a reductionist way and not taking in the context of the bigger picture.
So perhaps I'm misunderstanding, I can't remember the word I used now, disparaging, minimalising, saying that she agreed with it but then didn't think it was relevant. I'm not sure. So anyway, I don't wish to argue. So if it's offending the Deputy, then of course I'll withdraw.
Well, she has a right to reply anyway.
If it's offending, I don't wish to offend anyone. But we have not heard an economic argument. There was perhaps some criticism of the Treasury Department and the review that it did, and of course it did take longer than might have been. I understand from the department that some of the reason that it was delayed was to allow other work, not least of which was the residential tenancy law to move forward. So we've heard about fairness, and I think it's worth just considering that for a moment. What is the difference between what happened 10 years ago with the removal of mortgage interest tax relief, which was consulted upon for over 6 months and removed in a staged process? The economic advice at that point in that consultation was that in the residential sector, that mortgage interest tax relief led to being added to the value of the house. And so it's not correct to say that the removal of mortgage interest tax relief led to increasing in housing prices. Actually, the economic advice is that if anything, removing it acts as a drag. It just wasn't a sufficient drag because houses continued to increase in price. But what does the consultation, which again, I won't use a word, but the mover said only had 18 responses. It only had 18 responses, but it's not all responses were, of course, from individuals. and nor is it correct to suggest that the views gathered were only representative of landlords. Responses were also received from local representative bodies and tax and accountancy firms, which expressed concern about disallowing interest as a business expense. And that's where we have the difference. One is as a business, and as a business means that interest expense can be an allowable deduction. And that's important because that does actually directly feed into rents. So not the capital value of the house, but into rents. So we could make an argument around fairness, but I'm not sure it's the argument that we've heard, because removing this, and this is what the economic advisor tells us, it's what the consultation tells us, it will have a detrimental effect upon rents. And so we know that the data suggests that there would be around 20% of Jersey's rental properties affected. That's nearly 2,000 properties. That means that 2,000 islanders could see their rents increased as a result of this change. And that was different from the removal of mortgage interest tax relief, where that would have had, but not sufficiently, I accept that point, downward pressure on capital values. And so, sir, that is why the Treasury Minister, and far be it from me to disagree with her, the Treasury Minister rejects this proposal for the reasons outlined. If we listen to the economic advice, we listen to those who were consulted, the fairness is, by removing this today, we are leaving ourselves open that 2,000 islanders in those 2,000 properties could see their rents increased as a result of this change. And I ask members if that's actually what they want to do by supporting the deputy, rather than, as she indicated and other members have indicated, it's all about a matter of fairness between the two when they are different. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Gorst. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. When I first looked at this, I was thinking that this could be about symmetry, and I note that Deputy Mazik has mentioned fairness and I think an element of consistency, and I think you need to look at a high logical level in this, because I am a homeowner. I'm not a landlord. I have been a tenant, well, have been a landlord in the past as well. And as such, I provide myself with my own home. We, at the same time, do have social housing provided by Andium. Andium, when it's actually calculating profits, it can deduct its expenses. I can't deduct my expenses as a homeowner. I don't have an income, I don't pay tax, but basically I have to provide that home at my expense. So then you compare somebody who is a landlord and, like Andium, is providing homes to other people. They're actually providing a service. And Andium, as I've said, deducts its expenses in working out its income. And it's net income, and that might well turn into dividends to the Treasury. And rather ironically, it's not subject to Jersey income tax at all, unlike your private landlords. So I can't really see how that this can really be argued in the way that it's being argued, in terms of like an unfairness when it comes to thinking about the landlord service. The chief economic advisor, he's a paid government official, and I think that his view is a valid view. I'm a bit concerned when you get to a point where states members are potentially saying, well, let's ignore him because our views are better. He is a specialist in this area. The argument has been that he's been looking at things at a reductive way and not looking at the big picture. But I would suggest that the actual opposite, that he has been looking at the big picture. And the big picture is one of how we serve islanders and this concern about housing costs and what will happen if you remove this release that is reducing rents and should reduce rents. And if the argument is something to do with, well, this will, landlords are charging unfair rents, why should they have more in the way of profit? I will bring the speaker back to the fact that the residential tenancy law, which again was implemented against without consideration of more holistic advice by the chief economic advisor, bearing in mind costs, things like stamp duty and these sorts of things. That this, sorry, Sarah, I've lost my thread. That this, at the end of the day, this advice remains perfectly in point, and it is looking at the big picture. So my position, of course, as one might expect, is not to support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Scott. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. Ultimately, I think this is a question where sides have to be taken. I'll start my comments by thinking about what is our overall goal as a society, if you like. And I think that it would be reasonable to say that our goal should be that every person in Jersey should have access to an affordable home. And I also think that's achievable. You know, we have levers within our hands in terms of Andium and so on, but I think that should be our explicit goal. However we define affordable, I know there are different definitions and so on. But the principle is clear. So I think everything we do should be to try and deliver on that objective. House prices in Jersey are still too high relative to incomes. And that gap has widened significantly over the last 15 years, very significantly. If you look at the graph, it stays, the two things stay roughly, increasing roughly the same until, I don't know, about 15 years ago. And then the gap increases dramatically with a correction over the last few years. But a correction that does not close the gap back to where it was. And at the same time, over the last few years, the size of the private rental sector has grown substantially. It grew by 40% in just 10 years between 2011 and 2021, according to the census. And I think it's reasonable to argue that those two things are linked. So the other point I would make is I have a few battle scars in this issue. We hear frequent warnings that all these steps will lead to a retrenchment in the private rental market, that landlords will flee the market, that it's becoming impossible to be a successful private landlord, and so on. I was told when I brought in the licensing of rented dwellings that it would lead to an exodus of landlords from the market. Deputy Mezek was told the same thing when he brought in the residential tenancy law. It has not happened. In fact, the rental sector, as far as we can tell, continues to grow. In the 2011 census, there were approximately 10,500 private rental properties. In 2021 census, 14,000. And now under the licensing of rented dwellings, we have an even more complete picture with 18,715 licenses in issue when the last figures I saw were produced at the beginning of this year, I believe. So despite the supposed headwinds facing the sector that we have heaped on the rental sector, it continues to grow. I think there's been a lot of crying wolf, to be frank. So I think the question to be asked here is around what the actual effect of this measure would be. Deputy Barbara Ward says we'll be out of step if we take this measure. So my wife and I still own our old home in London, and we lost mortgage tax relief on the mortgage for that a long, long time ago. That was phased out by a notably conservative Chancellor. Let us remember, George Osborne. My final comments on this relate to the economic advisor's point, because I do think that it's worth considering the conclusion that the economic, or reminding ourselves what the economic advisor's report actually says, because it is far more nuanced, as you would expect from a senior civil servant, far more nuanced than the single quotes that have been picked out suggest. The bit that's been quoted, I think, is economic analysis suggests that affected landlords may respond to a change in policy by increasing rents where possible or selling the property. This may slow the recovery of the housing market. But that's not all he says. Changes to interest deductions will reduce the attractiveness of housing as an investment opportunity, and potential landlords may be deterred from becoming landlords. That's an important point. Deterred from becoming. The change is likely to dampen demand from private landlords for new buy-to-let properties and slow down the recovery in the housing market. This might be to the benefit of owner-occupiers. If the number of houses for sale is increased, and as the reduced demand from landlords means prices rise by less than they would otherwise. In other words, the very effect that we're trying to achieve. I said it was about choices. We do want the market to rise less than it currently is because of the risk that it might widen the gap too much between house prices and incomes. And he concludes that paragraph by saying, however, this might be to the benefit of owner-occupiers, and as the reduced demand from landlords means prices rise by less than they would otherwise. However, the overall effect on the economy is uncertain, just uncertain, not negative, uncertain, accepting that there is not a straight line here between abolishing mortgage tax relief on rents, on buy-to-let and negative effects. So the effect that the chief economist identified is it may slow the recovery of the housing market. As I say, given that we have not closed the gap between income and house prices, I do not mind if we slow the recovery. It is still a recovery. So the question for me is, will this levelling of the playing field help or hinder affordability? I think it will help. The Minister wants an economic argument. Well, the economic argument is there from the chief economist. It will take some demand out of the market by reducing the ability of potential landlords to outbid private buyers who will no longer be able to use their access to cheaper money to drive the price up. I'm in favour.
Thank you, Deputy Rowland. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then Deputy Balash.
So one of the economic laws that Reform Jersey constantly ignores is the law of supply and demand. Deputy Mezek made a superficially attractive argument that tax relief adds to pressure on house prices, but he, as Deputy Gorst said, provided no economic evidence to support that contention. House prices rise, it seems to me, because of the impact of the law of supply and demand. If there are more people wanting to buy houses than there are houses available, the prices go up. That's a kind of inexorable law. The economists say there are no tax policy reasons for removing the relief and that there may be unintended consequences. Might encourage landlords to leave the market. And Deputy Renouf quite rightly points out that the other possible aspect is the effect upon the ability of owner-occupiers to buy. So there is a possible impact there. But what it seems to me is absolutely certain is that it is not a good idea to reduce the number of elements of rented property. Deputy Mezek, I don't think, minds about that because he doesn't like the rental market for ideological reasons. But the interests of tenants lie in not increasing demand for rental properties while potentially reducing the supply, because the inexorable consequence of that is that rents will go up. And that's not my idea. That's the idea of the island's chief economist, which has been made absolutely clear. So, although there are arguments for Deputy Curtis's proposition, it seemed to me that they are outweighed by the economic arguments which go against it.
Thank you, Deputy Balash. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. Very quickly, I think to get back to the point of fairness here, I think there are 2 points here. That there is a cost to the taxpayer for this subsidy that is being given to private landlords. This is what we're dealing with. So by giving tax relief, that is tax that we are foregoing at a time when government is saying that we need to have money to spend on public services. And only last night, I know there was the cost of living crisis panel with Deputy Binet and Deputy Farnham, when they made it quite clear that there are only some options. You either increase taxation, or you grow the pie, or you make efficiency savings, or make savings generally. They don't necessarily have to be efficiency savings, of course. So what we're doing here is actually refusing money that we could be getting into Treasury to pay for those vital services. They could be paying for services at the hospital. They could be paying for services for all sorts of things in schools, roads, the essentials, before we even get to the nice-to-haves. And so there has to be a really good reason to give this tax break, this subsidy, to a particular section of the community. And we're giving that subsidy to people who probably in most cases own their own home already and have at least one other property, but it could be a whole string of properties here that they need a buy-to-let mortgage for, that somebody else is paying their mortgage on. I mean, let's face it, who's paying the mortgage of a buy-to-let landlord? It's not them, it's their tenant. And by giving tax relief on that, we're saying as a government, we don't want that tax that you're getting as income. So I think this is quite perverse. And the second point I would make is that what's the state of play for residential mortgage interest relief? It was abolished by previous governments. Was it this government? So the previous governments abolished it. And so you've got this inherent unfairness that if you live in a property and you have, which you're buying as your homeowner, but you're still paying off the mortgage, you can no longer claim that tax relief. And so it seems to me that if we want to be talking about equity, it would be really difficult for any future government and assembly to justify keeping this status quo, but not reintroducing mortgage interest relief for your sole residents. And that's going to come at a cost as well, because there are many more homeowners in Jersey than there are, I would suggest, buy-to-let landlords here. So for me, this is quite straightforward, even though I will be disadvantaged by this from a personal point of view because it affects my household. We resolve the conflict in the public interest. And the way to resolve that for me is to support my colleague, Deputy Curtis, in what she's bringing here and vote for this proposition, sir, because it is about equity. It's about a good use of government subsidies, and this is not an area that we should be subsidising presumably relatively well-off individuals in the community, one of whom is my wife, of course. I'll be careful what I say, sir, because I do need to still go back home after this. But it's not about our interest. This is about equity, fairness, and a good use of public money, sir. It's not something that I can vote against on that basis.
Thank you, Deputy Tadea. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Catherine Curtis to reply.
Thank you, sir. And I thank members for their contributions. I'll just make a few comments about those contributions. Deputy Barbara Ward talked about this being a business. Of course, as I already explained, they are not just a business. They do not even need a business license. So people renting out properties are not a normal business. And as for timing, with the thought that this might not be good timing, I do suspect there would never be a good time in this Assembly. So I hope I'm wrong in that thought. I thank Deputy Coles and Deputy Mesick for their speeches. Then, as for Deputy Gorst, I have to say I was surprised about that comment about me making disparaging comments, which of course was not accurate in any way whatsoever. I always strive to be fair when I speak in the Assembly, and I really don't like it when I hear comments like that. And also from Deputy Scott's remark, which is people having said, let's ignore the economic advisor. I don't think any speech has said, let's ignore the economic advisor. And I don't think we need to sink to that sort of level to have a debate, really. As for Deputy Gore's comments about how some speeches have been wide-ranging, going over a number of years, well, that's right, because there has been strong support in this chamber for a long, long time in support of housing as an investment vehicle, and not enough support for homeowners over many years. And I have to say, the consultation remains inadequate. 18 respondents is not sufficient as a basis for any sort of policy. And I do ask that members actually have read the section in the report that's attributed to the economic advisor. Of course, I agree with his comments, which focus on the effects of buy-to-let landlords. And I still think it doesn't take into account enough the bigger picture. Although I have to say, Deputy Renouf did look at that, and I thank Deputy Renouf because he explained the comments of the economic advisor better than I did. So as also Deputy Renouf said, the growth of the private rental sector over the years has had an impact on the increasing cost of housing. I think it's probably clear. I don't think we actually need an advisor to tell us that. Deputy Balash talked about the laws of supply and demand. Well, that hasn't worked well for us, has it? I mean, okay, unless some members think the current situation is okay. And Deputy Tadea reminded us about the cost of the taxpayer in giving mortgage interest tax relief on buy-to-let to buy-to-let landlords, that £2 million per year could be put to much better use. So I hope that members think about Jersey's overall situation with housing and the well-being of our people, and when they come to vote, and I ask for the appel.
Thank you, Deputy. The appell's been called for. I ask members to return to their seats. If members have now returned to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the chance to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can report that the proposition has been rejected. 18 votes pour, 21 votes contre, and 1 abstention. Sorry, 23, sorry. I'll repeat the numbers again. 18 votes pour, 21 votes contre, and 3 abstentions.
Both ways. Those voting for, the Conotabs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Bralard and St John, and deputies Southern, Tadier, Rob Ward, Alves, Mezek, Coles, Porray, Miles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Jearn, Kovac and Andrews, and online. Right, okay. And then Conch, the Conotabs of Trinity, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and deputies Labby, Luce, Lahegara, Ayer, Gorst, Farnham, Balash, Rose Binet, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson, Stevenson, and Deputy Scott online, and the Conotab of St Clement, and deputies Morale and Wall abstained.
Thank you. So we move.
Sir, before we move on, it's just a natural break. I have mentioned it to a couple of members. I wondered if I could make a proposition that, given we will not finish public business today, but it looks quite likely that with a good run we'll finish it on Monday, that we adjourn at 5:30 today, given it has been a long week, and members may wish to have a little more break. So I just thought, having checked the order paper and checked sensed the mood with a few members, at 5:30 might be an appropriate time, and this gives members time to plan.
Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Luce.
Sir, I can't see from the order paper that's guaranteed we would finish on Monday, and on the basis we might get to late Monday afternoon and regret stopping early today, I would like to continue as we proposed.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Is the appel called for? Or the appel is called for. I'll just wait for the graphier to load. So a vote pour is to adjourn at 5:30, and a vote contre is to carry on until 6 o'clock. So if all members are ready, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce the proposition has been adopted. 33 votes pour, 8 votes contre, and 1 abstention. So we move on to the next item of public business, which is P52, the prosecution of illegal taxi services. That's been lodged by Deputy Catherine Curtis, and the main respondent is the Minister for Infrastructure. An amendment's been lodged by the Minister for Infrastructure. So, Deputy Curtis, are you minded to accept the amendment? Sorry, I couldn't catch that.
Yes.
Yes. Are members content to take the proposition as amended? And I ask the greffier to read the proposition as amended.
The States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to request the Council of Ministers to consider either an update to the Motor Traffic Jersey Law 1935 or other new statutory offences in separate legislation to further support the investigation of illegal taxi services by the States of Jersey Police, with the aim to deter this practice by increasing the potential of successful prosecutions for unlawfully driving passengers for reward, and to bring forward the necessary legislation before 30th of June 2027 to give effect to this decision.
Sir, could I declare an interest? My husband is a taxi driver, not an illegal taxi driver.
Thank you, Deputy Labby. Are you proposing to abstain from voting?
I'll do whatever the Assembly feels right. I just felt it necessary to declare an interest.
Thank you, Deputy. Question for the Minister for Infrastructure. Minister, are you able to assist with how many taxi drivers there are in the island, whether it be legal or illegal?
I couldn't give you a number for illegal, sir, but we have over 300 taxi drivers who are doing the business. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, in that case,
legitimately.
Thank you. In that case, Deputy Laddie, you don't need to abstain from voting, but we note the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other declarations? No. So, Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. So during my time as chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, I've become aware of the dangers of a rapidly growing illegal taxi service. The main concern is that there could be an accident which is not covered by insurance, or an assault on a member of the public. Often members of the public using this service may be young and especially vulnerable following a night out. In fact, this may have already happened with people feeling unable to come forward. And I'll just comment quickly to say that I had a conversation with the Connétable of St. Juan about insurance yesterday, who's very knowledgeable about insurance, and he informed me that no insurance will assist in any way when an injured person was aware that the driver was not adequately insured. And I hope that's correct. This is the backup organisation as well, will not help. The illegal operation of offering lifts by unregulated, uninsured drivers in Jersey has grown to become a threat to the regulated taxi service and a potential risk to passengers and drivers, as well as a loss in revenue through untaxed earnings. I've received a few comments to say that taxis are too expensive. Well, this is an expensive island with high costs to run a business, and regulated taxi drivers must adhere to strict standards, which are not cheap to implement. There is nothing to stop any states member bringing in measures which aim to make the service less expensive. More competition might help, but that won't happen while an alternative illegal service is permitted to flourish. There are also comments that we should encourage car sharing. A car sharing group was set up a few years ago with the aim of checking the drivers and it being a genuine service. There was an app for it. Unfortunately, it had to close down for various reasons, including a lack of public support. This proposition does not aim to limit car sharing. It is just trying to stop the growth of an illegal business. What we now have is a tightly regulated taxi service and an entirely unregulated, illegal paid service. One of the most popular current services is known as Jersey Lifts. This advertises a service on Facebook groups that is unregulated and requires no DBS checks for drivers. One group has approximately 14,000 members and another has approximately 28,000 members. That's from the last time I checked. Clearly, it's not just a group of friends giving each other lifts or sharing the costs. There are regular drivers advising their availability, occasionally stating their charges, which are most often arranged through Facebook Messenger or in the car. For example, a lift from town to First Tower, £15. This black market economy is expanding into other services now. For example, with one driver now offering a collection and dumping service. Of course, it's not possible to get full data on an illegal operation, but it has to be assumed from the evidence that we do have that there are people earning their living by operating as illegal taxi drivers and not paying any tax or social security on their earnings. If anyone thinks this is okay, I'd like them to consider whether they'd be happy to have someone else set up a business similar to theirs or in similar employment and not having to pay tax on their profits or earnings and not having to take account of any health and safety regulations. Perhaps we could have a dual service of cafes and shops which are not taxed with no safety requirements because they might be cheaper. That's the reasoning behind supporting the illegal lift service. During the last few months, I have met with the Jersey Taxi Drivers Association and other island taxi companies and held discussions with the Chief of Police, an advocate with special knowledge in this area, and with the Law Officers Department. How to resolve this matter is complex, which is one reason why it's taken months for me to bring it to the Assembly, and why, even then, it needed an amendment to make it more practical. I had thought the best way forward was to make amendments to the Motor Traffic Law 1935. However, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have had a meeting with all interested parties, including the police, the head of DVS, the taxi service, and policy officers, which occurred around the lodging date of my proposition. There was a good discussion considering the best way forward to tackle this problem. The main point being that we all recognised it as a serious problem that needs to be addressed. So that's my own aim in this matter, that however we do it, we need to curtail what's grown into a full-time job for some with no safeguards that puts members of the public at risk. So I'm grateful to the Minister for his assistance and for bringing this amendment. As stated in my report, it is the fundamental responsibility of any government is to protect citizens from harm, and it is by extension the responsibility of this State's Assembly to put the matter right. Leaving this to drift will only allow the problem to grow, and I hope members will be supportive of the proposition.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Minister for Infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. So I'd like to open my remarks by expressing my gratitude to Deputy Curtis for bringing this proposition and for her constructive approach in considering the amendment. I'm very pleased that we are able to arrive at a position of agreement, which I hope will support a positive debate today. Sir, this is unquestionably a very important topic. It is important because it is about the respect for the rule of law, it's about proper regulation, and it is about public safety. As infrastructure, my responsibility is for the regulated taxi service. This is an industry which, as I've said in my report to my amendment, is attracting new younger drivers and is seeing modest growth. In the past 2 years, we've seen a net increase of 13 drivers, in most cases individuals who are seeking to supplement their main income. we've welcomed 32 new drivers in the last 12 months, including 14 since January. And I can confirm that we have a further 30 people in different stages of the process who have not set their tests yet. It's an industry which offers a career for anyone who wishes to take it up properly, either as a main or a supplementary income. And I've spent 2 years working with the taxi drivers to support their industry, improve customer service, and ensure we listen to public feedback with market research, including mystery shoppers. Sir, I can tell you, I should put on record, sir, that the overwhelming majority of drivers and companies represent themselves and the island well and provide a good service. Technology is now widely adopted in the industry. A new code of conduct is being introduced, as well as QR codes being installed in all vehicles so that people can rate their drivers just as people do around the world. And we want more people who will do a good job for their customers and be ambassadors for Jersey. So we may be able to issue more plates, sir, but we cannot do that until we regulate everybody. So we could have plates that allowed people to operate just on a Friday and Saturday evening if the demand is there. We can be clear that people who operate through Jersey Lifts are doing so wholly out of choice and in the knowledge that they are acting outside of a regulated industry and in contravention to the law. I'm reliably informed that the growth of Jersey Lifts roughly coincides with the emergence of Facebook as a mass social media platform, which is now roughly 20 years. So this isn't a new challenge. As Infrastructure Minister, what I am not responsible for is the investigation of illegal activity. And Jersey Lifts clearly is an illegal activity contravening Articles 5 and 6 of the Motor Traffic Law. Combating this illegal activity is a job, sir, for the police, which is one reason why I brought my amendment. If we are to address the problems posed by Jersey Lifts, then this is not something that can be done by the Infrastructure Minister alone. A collective approach is required. So I don't need to remind members of the dangers of getting into an unregulated or unlicensed vehicle driven by a stranger who doesn't have insurance for the purpose of your journey. Yet many tens, probably hundreds of islanders are doing exactly that every weekend. That is why, sir, I've asked several times since I became Infrastructure Minister whether there was anything I could do to improve the law to help us combat Jersey Lifts. I asked this particularly in view of the most recent failed prosecution. Proposals for legislative change were never immediately forthcoming. It wasn't a case of yes or no, but simply that it is a complicated area of law and that investigations and prosecutions in this area are not simple. Consequently, it should be expected that any law changes will not be straightforward and will require thought. But this proposition offers us an opportunity to take this out of the too difficult box and to try and make real progress. I think it should be recognised that there are views in some quarters that the government and the police are actually quite happy with Jersey Lifts. The argument goes that it helps clear the town of an evening, saving long queues of people lining up at the weighbridge, and it helps clear people from events once they have ended. For my part, sir, I am not happy with people who willfully act outside of a regulated industry. We don't know anything about the background of these people. They are not properly insured, and as Deputy Curtis says, they are not paying tax or social security on their earnings. And I don't believe the police are happy with it either, sir. They recognise the issues for public safety, they've investigated Jersey Lifts, and they've worked with the Attorney General to bring prosecutions. Sir, this proposition has indeed given rise to some of the challenges we face in combating illegal lifts. Since it was lodged, I've received advice we could indeed tighten up the motor traffic law, or that we might well need a separate piece of legislation, hence the aspect of my amendment. I said earlier, though, sir, that the proposition gives us an opportunity. The proposition means we can come together, infrastructure, the police, the prosecutor and the industry, to identify how we can improve our support for the investigation of these illegal services and increase the potential for successful prosecutions. And it provides a realistic timeframe for doing so. So I ask members to support the amended proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the Infrastructure Minister on this point. The problem is this has been an issue for over a decade. Ireland has been telling us that our taxi system is not working as it should. We have seen from report after report that the roots of the problem lie not with the drivers, nor with the travelling public, but with an outdated and fragmented regulatory framework, much of it still grounded in a law first passed in 1935. The Policy Centre's most recent policy brief on the regulation of taxis makes this point plainly. The regulatory system is outdated, opaque, and not fit for modern transport environment, particularly one shaped by smartphones, apps, and on-demand services. The brief notes that our taxi service continues to be governed by a 1935 law with layers of amendments and unpublished conditions added over time, creating a system that is neither transparent nor easily understood by the public or even by operators themselves. At the same time, we face the growing reality of informal lift services such as Jersey Lifts, operating through Facebook groups and now numbering tens of thousands of users. The Policy Centre makes clear that this service is widely used, unregulated, and crucially, not illegal under current law. This is not simply a legal blind spot, it is evidence of a system struggling to meet public demand. Whether we personally agree with these informal services or not, their popularity is telling us something. People want quicker, cheaper, more flexible, more accessible transport options than the current system currently provides. James Lewis, writing for the Policy Centre, describes the situation bluntly. Jersey has allowed the taxi industry to fall behind norms in the rest of the world by failing to update a regulatory structure that dates back nearly a century. We must also consider the views of islanders themselves. Recent research published by the Policy Centre shows that when asked to rate their taxi experience, islanders gave scores of 3.6 out of 10 for cost and 4 out of 10 for availability. These numbers reflect a public that is not being well served, especially at peak times, at busy locations, or when public transport is unavailable. The answer to these challenges is not to abandon regulation. The answer is better regulation, modern, proportionate, transparent, and aligned with how people actually use transport in 2026. The best approach to updating taxi regulation in Jersey must, therefore, follow a coherent set of principles informed by the evidence. First, we need a full modernisation of the legal framework. The 1935 law cannot simply be patched forever. A new taxi service law should set out clear definitions, modern obligations, and fair regulatory powers. As the Policy Centre states, the current system lacks transparency and clarity, with requirements scattered across multiple unpublished conditions. Secondly, we must address restrictive market structures, particularly the cap on vehicle licences. Jersey remains an outlier among comparable jurisdictions in artificially limiting taxi numbers. The Policy Centre highlights that this cap sits officially at 310, yet in practice the number is lower due to the difficulty of meeting licensing conditions. These constraints act as a brake on availability and create an incentive for informal alternatives. Third, we must reduce unnecessary barriers to entry. The requirement for drivers to be full-time, to affiliate to specific booking services, and to complete 18 months with a recognised company before obtaining a vehicle licence all add red tape without corresponding public benefit. These obstacles suppress competition, limit flexibility, and impede the natural evolution of the market. Fourth, we must embrace modern technology. The introduction of RIDE is a welcome development, but it is constrained by the outdated regulatory system around it. Islanders have made clear their desire for transparent pricing, app-based tracking, digital payment, and real-time availability, all features that consumers in most other places now take for granted. We must bring informal lift services into the regulatory framework, not by banning genuine cost sharing, but by preventing unlicensed commercial activity. The current legal position is unclear, unenforceable, and unsafe. As the Policy Centre observes, Jersey Lifts operates at large scale and in a legal grey zone. It is our responsibility to close that gap, both to protect the public and to provide fairness to licensed operators. Finally, we must align transport regulation with our climate commitments. With ambitious carbon reduction targets, the taxi fleet has a role to play in reducing emissions, transitioning to cleaner vehicles, and supporting active transport where appropriate. This is not an afterthought, it is a central part of modern regulation. Members, the choice before us is not between taxis and lift shares, nor between regulation and the free market. The choice is between keeping a failing, outdated system or building a modern, safe, consumer-focused transport framework that works for the public, for drivers, for tourism, and for the island's future. The evidence before us is clear. The public demand is clear. The policy requirements are clear. Updating taxi regulations is not only sensible, it is overdue. I urge members to support this direction of reform, to modernise our law and to bring Jersey's taxi services into line with the needs, expectations and realities of the 21st century. I will therefore be supporting the amended proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Wall. The next member to speak is Deputy Coles, followed by the Connétable of St Saviour, followed by Deputy Scott. So, Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Wall confused me as the tone of his speech. I thought he was going the other way until he said it at the end there, so that was quite nice to hear the slight change of point, because I think the point that has to be made is that actually these informal lifts are still breaking the law because it is a legal requirement to have insurance. And if you are driving a vehicle as being used for an illegal taxi service, it's because you are not insured for that journey. Also, you need other licenses and you need other conditions, and if you don't have those, that is what makes that lift illegal. And there is just a big thing about the risk to individuals, especially when we're at our most vulnerable, and I know we all make poor decisions once we've had a couple of beverages of a Friday evening. And so that is why taxis are actually a really important part of our island. Although I do agree that we need probably some form of reform to our taxi structure, because one of the things that I agree with in some aspects is the fact that I like to know what I'm paying before I get into the car, sir. And if more of our taxis were able to do a pre-agreed pricing structure, that would probably be the way forward for our taxi industry. But of course, this proposition isn't about our taxi industry. It's about people who are operating services illegally. And so I just want to make a couple of points, again, because I think there's another group other than the Policy Centre who probably be quite linked with some of their memberships that are now maybe a political movement. I don't know. But they, in their survey that they've put out to islanders, they obviously make a recommendation to, make our taxi services easier by listing certain mobile phone app companies that you can then require a driver and they'll come to pick you up. And so I thought, let's have a look at their criteria. What do they need from you to join and be part of that service in the UK? So you've obviously got to have a driver's licence. Over 21. So that probably would limit a lot of these people offering illegal lifts, because they're normally 17-year-olds and not hitting 21. They need something that's based in the UK called a private hire licence, or they call it a PHV licence, where in Jersey you need a PSV licence. So no real difference so far. A knowledge test, again, that's something that you need to become a taxi driver in Jersey as well as a driver for one of these mobile phone apps. A DVLA so that would be a DBS check. The only thing that Jersey doesn't require that this company does is the MOT. So that's the only way that Jersey's taxi drivers are actually falling behind these online apps in the UK anyway. It's just on the methodology by which you can request one of these drivers to come pick you up. And that's the only convenience that these illegal lift services offer that our Jersey taxi drivers don't. And so, sir, I will be absolutely supporting this because we need to think of people's safety, and especially once you've had a couple of drinks, sir. And I'm be staggered that, like has been mentioned, that if somebody hasn't had an adverse interaction with a driver of one of these people, I would be surprised. But people are obviously normally quite scared, and the risk of prosecution anyway coming forward is quite challenging for a lot of these people. So this is about people's safety, and that's why we should support it.
Thank you, Deputy Coles. So the Constable of St Saviour.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure where people are going with this one, sir, asking for more regulation to make it illegal for these unlicensed cabs. It already is illegal. It's the enforcement and the powers to enforce that we really need. Our daughter now is grown up and has a family of her own, but when she was young, she would often travel across Ireland to meet friends for a party. But would you let your young daughter leave the house at 9 o'clock at night to get into a complete stranger's car who may not even have a driving license? You don't know. You don't know if they're on drugs, you don't know if they've been drinking. And we all need insurance companies. They do a wonderful job. But unless you stick to the conditions, they will not pay out. So, heaven forbid, if a car should hit a tree and somebody ends up in a wheelchair or worse, then there will be no insurance whatsoever because the insurance company wouldn't pay it because the driver would not be insured for driving for hire and reward. Completely separate insurance. As Deputy Ward was saying, regarding deregulation of the taxi service, either we have a well-regulated taxi service or we don't. Of course, there's always room for improvement. But I'd say, it's difficult now. I mean, as members know, and you look at the internet now, there's lots of people who choose to be anonymous. Little pair of binoculars comes up, so you don't know who the person is. So tracking down through the internet is going to be a challenge. That if a car is stopped by a police officer, either states or honorary for some reason or other, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just giving my friend a lift somewhere. Proving it is going to be very, very difficult. They're doing it for reward. But I think the police and the Minister for Infrastructure and all various departments need all the help they can get to finally put this one to bed because it's long overdue for being put to sleep permanently. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatap. The next member to speak is Deputy Scott, but I'm conscious that the adjournment's proposed. Members content to adjourn? Yeah. State stands adjourned until 2 p.m.